Trot is, none av us was in no great hurry, Creed's woman having cashed his paycheck and skipped out, but at last we come to for we CDC place, and sure enough Dura stood open and inside come a racket av smash in furniture and yellin' TWD done proud to camp meeting salvation. Thin come a fine loud rattle av glass, and out rough a windy come half av a chair, followed by a length av stove and a grain glass worth a pitcher. For me own part, I seed such like brick a brack before, and besides I remembered a drink I hadn't took earlier in evening, so I started working me way to back av crowd, beta someone ill CDC. I no more than tur and around when wid a whoop, TWD wake dead, out rough windy come domnades lucan cryther this side av Borneo, a wavin over his head one av out lady Creed's rid cotton tablecloths, and neither another stitch to his name but a leather belt with about 6 inches av pants a haggin onto ut, and a pair av corked boots. When I started from Burges I laid holt av a man's size crowbar, but at that minute thing I held in me hand looked about heft av a tin pin in nail. Be that all thy others was av loiknglan to me. They was considerable crowdine, and, being crippled, I dropped me crowbar and laid a good holt on thy tail av hod's coat. Stur was close by, and we had a good start, but thy thing that was after us was thravelin' loiten in fort a few leps. 'Twas a good race, and one I wanted to win, but, owing to universal willingness av crowd to get into Thystura, we plugged up Thydura and before we cd get unstuck thing was on to us, gibberin' and jabberin' and screamin' and laughing all to vunst. Ut took 8 av us to howd whilst Burge toit hand and feut, and when we drug into Stura we seed 'twas Creed hisself. 'Twas 2 days before sheriff come for 11m, and in main twam he'd gabble and yell about Greener coming after 11m, and how he come out av wather, and so on. Wrist think ut's stayin' alone made loony, but I put 2 and 2 together, here's mun crossin' loshed his burrowed Zion Creed scant witless be soit av Greener, thwat's answer. Phi, THBY ain't dead at all. Some ways he got out av river, scare daylights out av Creed, and made off with burrowed Zi. Am I right? Exactly, exclaimed Bill. I know dut. Ye vet luck av Captain Front's own sylph. That come out av ive scraped with his life, save last one, and he wd thin av a domned naja shell hadn't bust ag in his ribs, but that's twam's gone. I wonder where mun crossin' is now. Right here in Hilarity, him and his crew unloaded yesterday fur to rt fur camp in Marnin. I think I'll just let the boss believe I'm still in the river until after I have had a talk with Appleton. By the way, Daddy, how are you fixed for money? Sure, I got more money than a man ought to have, money in thy bank and money in me pocket, take ut and tossed a thick wallet onto the ye won't have to go to Minneapolis. Old man Appleton's over to Creighton, 18 miles west av here, superintending a new camp on Blood River, 110 miles above Mun Crossins. Fallon's wid 11m, and Stromberg, and a lot more avth good men that's tward av1 kin under Mun Crossin'. He is not bossing the camp himself, exclaimed Bill. No, but he's got to keep an eye on T. Fallon'll be a kind av straw boss and look after thy wor RK, but thy oud man'll have to figure thy twam and scale, Fallon ale got no agacatin'. T's right glad I am thinking oud man'll be to lay eyes on ye. They say he was all bruck up when he hear ed ye was rounded. Bill's visit to Hilarity was known to no one except Daddy Dunnigan, and the following evening after Mun Crossin's departure for the woods, the two proceeded to the railway by a circuitous route. Unobserved, he swung aboard the caboose of the local freight train which stood at the tiny platform, discharging goods. He'll be after markin' ye boss avth new camp opined the old man from his position beside a pile of ties. An av ye need a cook just dropped me a loin and oil come. I haven't got the job yet laughed Bill. But ye will. Owd Appleton'll be glad enough not having to come thrapsin into Thire Woods a month or so during th winter. The old man leaned forward upon his clutch, and with pathetic eagerness scanned the face of the younger man. Me by, he said, av your plans is changed, were road from thrl, or what not, that'll be taking ye back to New Year RK, ye'll take me wid ye. Oi may be a bit owd, but I'm as good as oi was. Oi see dear rn to run your automobile or take care av thigh horses, land thigh babies, ut makes no difference, for whilst a McKim lives our Dunnigan belongs to look after never fear, Daddy, cried Bill, as the train jerked into motion. Now that we've found each other, we'll stick together until the end. And he stood silent upon the steps of the caboose until the figure of the old Irishman blended into the background. In the front room of the one-story building with its undeceptive two-stow front, where Appleton had established his headquarters in the little town of Creighton, the lumber magnate sat talking with Irish Fallon. The tote road leading to the new camp had been pushed to completion, and Appleton was giving Fallon some final instructions. I must leave for Minneapolis in the morning, he said. Do the best you can, and I will MN up as often as possible. Oi'll do UT, sorry replied Irish. Oi CN lay down th logs all right, th through'll be with th figures. If only me friend, Bill, was here, sure, there was th fine lad. Appleton pulled at his grey moustache and regarded the other thoughtfully. You knew him well, this Bill, he asked. Oi was thigh for rst hoit man he seen in th woods th day he stud knee deep in th snow avth tote road, lookin' down a th carcass avd ablish. And from that twam on till he went down under th logs we was like two brothers, only more so. Pretty good man, was he? There was a man. Fallon's big fist banged noisily upon the table, and his blue eyes lighted as he faced his employer. Mr. Appleton, ye lost a man fwin th green a wintunda. Fearin' neither God, man, nor th devil, he come into th woods, and in one saison lear rnt more about logs thin th most av usle iv no. Mun Crossan liked him, spoke very highly of him, and that is unusual with Mun Crossan. Fallon's breath whistled through his teeth at the words loiked did he? Sure he loiked like a rabbit loikes a wolf. He leaned forward in his chair, punctuating his remarks with stabs of a huge forefinger upon the other's knee. Mr. Appleton, Mun Crossan hated An ive man along th river that day knows that avut vasn't fur Mun Crossan, th greenady be living this minute, only we can't prove ut. Th boss hated because he was a beta man, because he knowed he a clan man, we'd a fightin' here rt and two fists and th guts to carry t rough. He chilled th har rt avth boss th ftrrst noit he seen and from thin on th fear was upon fur th bird's eye. The bird's eye? Inquired Appleton. What do you mean? Fallon hesitated. His enthusiasm had carried him further than he had intended. He gazed out of the window, wondering how to proceed, when his eyes fastened upon a large, heavily bearded man who approached rapidly down the wooden sidewalk. A folded mackinaw swung carelessly across the fringed arm of his buckskin shirt. The iron latch rattled, the man entered, closed the door behind him, and, turning, faced the two with a smile. For a long moment the men gazed at the newcomer in silence, then Fallon's chair crashed backward upon the floor as the Irishman leaped to his feet. "Them eyes," he cried, throwing a huge arm across the man's shoulders and shaking him violently in his excitement. Bill. Fur th love av God, tell me tease yezel for ye damn shkundrel, ain't ye drowned at all? And fur ye ben kapin yezelf. Bill laughed aloud and wrung Appleton's hand. The lumberman had risen to his feet, staring incredulously into the other's face while he repeated over and over again, "Boy. My boy." Fallon danced about, waving his arms and shouting, "New camp'll go to rough hell a whoopin'. Bill will be boss, and min'll tear out thigh bone to bait mun crossin'." Order was finally restored, and the three seated themselves while Bill recounted his adventures. Appleton's brow clouded as he learned the details of the bird's eye plot. "So that's the way he worked it," he exclaimed. "I knew that there was some bird's eye in the timber, and that I was not getting it. But I laid it to outside thieves, never supposed one of my own foremen was double-crossing me. That is mun crossin's finish," he added grimly. "I need him this winter. Too many contracts to afford to do without him. In the spring, though, there will be an accounting, and mark my words, he will get what is coming to what next, for me?" asked Bill. Appleton smiled. "I'll think Fallon has disposed of your case," he replied. "My boy, I want you to take this new camp and get out logs. I won't set any specific amount, I will tell you this, I must have 25 million feet out of the Blood River country this winter. You are the first inexperienced man I have ever placed in charge of a camp. I don't know what you can do. I'll take the chance. It's up to you. My camps are run without interference from the office. Results count with me, not methods. Feed your crew all they can eat, of the best you can get. Knock a man down first and argue with him afterward. Let them know who is boss, and you will have no trouble. Don't be afraid to spend money, but get out the logs." The following morning the new foreman stood upon the platform of the station as the heavy, vestibuled Imperial Limited ground to a stop, under special orders to take on the great lumberman. "So long, Bill," Appleton called. "See you next month. Bringing a party into the woods for a deer hunt? May put up at your camp for a couple of weeks." The train pulled out for the east, leaving Bill Carmody gazing, just a shade wistfully, perhaps, at the contented-looking men and women who flashed past upon the rich plush cushions. But as the last coach passed he squared his shoulders with a jerk and turned quickly away. Chapter 35. A hunting party. H.D. Appleton, millionaire lumberman, sighed contentedly as he added cream to his after-dinner coffee. He glanced toward his wife, who was smiling at him across the table. "Oh, you can drink yours black if you want to, little girl," he grinned, "but, remember way back when we were first married and I was bossing camps for old Jimmy Ferguson, and we lived in log shacks way up in the big woods, I used to say if we ever got where we could have cream for our coffee, I'd have nothing else to ask for. Well, to this day, drinking cream in my coffee is my idea of the height of luxury. This is all right, and I enjoy it, too, I suppose." He indicated with a wave of his black cigar the rich fumishings, the heavy plate and cut glass that adorned the dining room. "But, somehow, nothing makes me feel successful like pouring real cream into my coffee." The grey-haired little girl laughed happily. "You never have quite grown up, Hubert," she replied. "Did you have a hard trip, dear? The 3 weeks you have been away have seemed like 3 months to me." No. I had a good trip. It looked rather hopeless at first, trying to establish a new camp, with no one really capable of running it, but just at the last minute, you remember the man I told you about last fall, the young fellow who throttled that scoundrel after the wreck in the Chicago railroad yards, and who refused to tell me his name until after he had made good? Yes, he was drowned last spring, wasn't he? Poor boy, I have often wondered who he was. A gentleman, you said? By gad, he's more than a gentleman, he's a man. And he wasn't drowned at all. Got rescued somehow by an old squaw and her daughter. His leg was broken, and when he got well he stayed in the woods and looked after the camp all summer, and not only that, he recovered 52 bird's eye maple logs that had been stolen by some of me own men. He found me in Creighton, and I made him boss of the new camp. He's a winner, and the men will work for him till they drop. Oh, by the way, Hubert, said Mrs. Appleton. Mr. Sheridan called up a day or two ago and wanted to know when you would return. He said you and he had planned a deer hunt this fall. Yes, we'll go about the 1st of the month. It's been a good while since Ross Sheridan and I have had a hunt together, not since the old days on the Crow Wing. Remember the time Ross and I got lost, and nearly scared you women folks to death? Indeed I do. I never will forget that blizzard, and those 3 awful days. We had been married only 6 months, and Mary Sheridan and I were the only women in the camp. I'll remember how good all the men were to us, telling us you were in no danger, and not to worry, and all during the storm they were searching the woods in squads. Oh, it was awful. And yet, her voice trailed into silence, and she stared a long time into the open fire that blazed in the huge fireplace. And yet, what, little girl, asked Appleton, smiling fondly upon her, what are you thinking about? Come, tell me. She turned her eyes toward him, and the man detected a wistful look in them. I was thinking, dear, of how happy we were those 3 years we spent way up in the timber while you were getting your start. Not that we haven't always been happy, she hastened to add, because we have. We couldn't have been happier unless some children had come. But, dear, those days when we were so poor and had to work so hard, and every dollar counted, and we had to do without things we both wanted, and sometimes things we really needed. And, oh, Hubert dear, do you remember the organ? And how long it took us to save up the $60. And how I cried half the night for pure joy when you brought it home on the ox sled. And how I used to play in the evenings, and the Sheridans were there, and the men would come and listen, and their big voices would join in the singing, and how sometimes a man would draw a rough sleeve across his eyes when he thought no one was looking. Do you remember? Yes, 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 of course I remember. The lumberman's voice was suspiciously GNLFF. Seems almost like another world. His wife suddenly stretched her arms towards the open fire. Oh, Hubert, I want to go back. What? Yes, dear, just once more. Appleton saw the tears in her eyes. Want to smell the fragrance of the pine woods, and sit on the thick pine needles, and cook over an open fire. Bacon and trout and coffee, yes, and no real cream, either. She smiled at him through her tears. Canned milk, and maybe some venison steels. Want to borrow your pocket knife and dig out spruce gum and chew it, with the little bits of bark in it, she went on, and I won't promise not to pry with it, either. I hope I do break the blade. Do you remember that day, and how mad you were? I want to see the men crowd into the grub shack, and hear the sound of the axes and saws and the rattle of chains and the crashing of big trees. I want to see the logs on the rollways, and, Hubert, you won't think I'm awful, will you, dear, but I want to, just once more in my life, I want to hear a big man swear. H.D. Appleton stared at his wife in blank amazement, and then, throwing back his head, roared with laughter. Well, you sure will, little girl, if you try to slip any canned milk into my coffee. His wife regarded him gravely. I am not joking, Hubert. Oh, can't you see? Just once more I must have a taste of the old, hard, happy days, can't I? Why, Margaret, you don't really mean that you want to go into the woods, seriously? Yes, I do mean just exactly that, seriously. Appleton tugged at his mustache and puckered his forehead. We might make up a party, he mused. I'll speak to Ross in the morning. The little grey-haired woman stepped lightly around the table, and, seating herself on his lap, captured his big fingers in her own. How many times must I tell you not to pull your mustache, dear? Now, listen, I have a plan. There will be Mary Sheridan and Ross and Ethel Manton, you know she promised us a visit this fall, and I expect her any day now. A trip into the woods will do her a world of good, poor girl. She has had lots of responsibility thrust upon her since brother Fred died, with young Charlie to look out for, and the care of that big house. Mrs. Potter, you know she lives next door to Ethel, writes me that she does not believe the girl is happy that this St. Ledger, or whatever his name is, that she is reported engaged to, is not the kind of a man for Ethel at all, and that she hasn't seemed herself for a year, some unhappy love affair, the man was a scamp, or something, so this trip will be just what she needs. Charlie will be with her, of course, and we can invite that young Mr. Holbrook, you have met him, that nice young man, the Van Ness's nephew. We will go away up into the big woods where you men can hunt to your heart's delight, and we women will stay around the camp and do the cooking and smell the woods and chew spruce gum. Oh, Hubert, won't it be just grand? Appleton caught something of his wife's enthusiasm. It sure will, little girl. But what's he for? What is who for? This Holbrook person. Where does he come in on this? Why, for Ethel, of course. Goose. Don't you see that if Ethel is not happy, if she is not really in love with this St. Ledger, and she spends 2 or 3 weeks in the same camp with a nice young man like Mr. Holbrook, well, there's no place like the woods for romance, dear, you see, I know. And he has money, too, she added. Appleton suddenly lifted his wife to her feet and began pacing up and down the room. Money, he exclaimed. He never earned a cent in his life. But he is the Van Ness heir. Old Van Ness made his money selling corsets and ribbons. Why, dear, what difference does that make? I am sure the Van Nesses are among. I don't care who they are among, or what they are among, interrupted her husband. We don't want any niece of ours marrying ribbons. Hold on a minute, let me think. By gad, I've got a scheme. He continued to pace up and down the length of the room, puffing shortly upon his cigar and emitting emphatic grunts of satisfaction. I've got it, he exclaimed. If you're bound to marry Ethel off, we will give her the chance to marry a man. Go ahead and make up the penny, but leave ribbons out of it. We will let Ethel rest up for a few days and then we will start, straight for the new camp. There is a man there. But objected his wife, you know nothing about him. You don't know even his name. What difference does that make? I know a good man when I see one. I know enough about him to know that he is good enough for Ethel or any other woman. And, if he hasn't got a name now, by gad, he is making one, up there in the big country. But he has no money. No money. How much did we have when we were married? Why, little girl, you just got through saying that the happiest days we ever spent were up there in the woods when money was so scarce that we knew the date on every dollar we owned, and every scratch and nick on them, and the dimes and pennies too. The little woman smiled. That is you, Hubert, but somehow nothing. If we did it, these two can do it. They've got a better chance than we had. I'm not going to live forever. I need a partner. I'm getting old enough to begin to take things easier, to step aside and let a younger man shoulder the burden. He threw his arm lovingly about his wife's shoulders, and drew her close. We never had a son, sweetheart, he said gravely, but if we had, I'd want him to be just like that boy. He's making good. Margaret Appleton looked up into her husband's eyes. You haven't made many mistakes, dear, she whispered. Make good, for your sake and, maybe for Ethel's. I hope he will. Chapter 36. Told on the trail, it was a merry party that clambered into the big tote wagon in the little town of Creighton one morning in early November. Upon request of Appleton and Sheridan, two of the road's heaviest lumber shippers, a private car had been coupled to the rear of the Imperial Limited at Winnipeg. Later the big train hesitated at Hilarity long enough to permit a half-breed guide in full hunting regalia to step proudly aboard, to the envy of the dead little town's assembled inhabitants. And later still the Limited stopped at Creighton and shunted the private car onto a spur. Appleton promptly impressed one of his own tote wagons which had been sent to town for supplies, and before noon the 4-horse team was swung into the tote road carrying the hunting party into the woods. Tents, blankets, and robes had been ranged into more or less comfortable seats for the accommodation of the party, while young Charlie Manton insisted upon climbing onto the high driver's seat, where he wedged himself uncomfortably between the teamster and Blood River Jack, the guide. From the time the latter had joined the party at Hilarity, the boy had stuck close to his side, asking innumerable questions and listening with bated breath to the half-breed's highly colored narratives in which wolves, bears, and Indians played the important parts. In the evening, when they camped beside the tote road, and he was permitted to help with the tents and the firewood, the youngster fairly bristled with importance, and after supper when the whole party drew about the great campfire the boy seated himself close by the side of the guide. "You never told me your name," he ventured. "Blood River Jack," the man replied. "That's a funny kind of a name," puzzled the boy. "Why did they name you that?" "Jax, that is my name. Blood River, that is where I live. It is that my lodge is near the bank of the river, and in the Blood River country I hunt and lay my trap lines, and in the waters of the river I fish." "What is your name?" "New York Charlie," unhesitatingly replied the boy, and flushed deeply at the roar of laughter with which the others of the party greeted his answer. But the long-haired, dark-skinned guide, noting the angry flash of the wide, blue eyes, refrained from laughter. "That is a good name," he said gravely. "In the land of the white man men are called by the name of their fathers. In the woods it is not often so, except when it be written upon papers. The best man in the North is one of whom men know only his first name." "Here's MSU Bill, the man who cannot. Why can't he die?" asked the youngster eagerly. Jax shook his head. "Wahatanata says all men die," he replied. "But, did not the Cheshire Co come into the North in the time of a great snow, and without rackets mush 40 miles in 2 days? Did he not kill with a knife Diabolos, the wet wolf, whom all men feared, and with an axe chop in pieces the wolves of her pack? Did he not strike fear to the heart of the great Muncrossan with a look of his eye? And, with 3 blows of his fist, lay the mighty Stromberg upon the floor like a wet rag? Did he not come without hurt through the fire when Creed locked him in the bumming shack? And did he not go down through the terrible Blood River rapids, riding upon a log, and live, when Muncrossan ordered the breaking out of the jam that he might be killed among the pounding logs? These are the things that kill men, yet the Cheshire Co lives. Gee, think of that," exclaimed the boy, turning toward his sister, who from her place by the side of her Aunt Margaret had been an interested listener. "He must be some man. Where does he live? Will we see him?" Before the half-breed could reply, Appleton broke in. "He sure is some man," he exclaimed enthusiastically. "And you will see him about day after tomorrow night, if we have good luck. I don't know about all the adventures Blood River Jack mentioned, but I have heard of some of them, and I can add the story of the outwitting of a couple of card sharps and a fight in the dark, in the cramped quarters of an overturned railway coach, in which he all but choked the life out of a human fiend who was robbing the dead and injured. And I might tell of another fight, the gamest fight of all, but, wait till you know him. He is foreman of the camp which will be our headquarters for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Ito, hear them talk," said Mrs. Appleton to her niece. "One would imagine this man a huge, bloodthirsty ruffian, but he isn't. Hubert says that he is in every respect a gentleman." "Yes," agreed her husband, "but one who is not afraid to get out and work with his 2 hands, and work hard, and who has never learned the meaning of fear. I took a chance on him, and he has made good." The phrase fell upon the ears of the girl with a shock. They were the words he had used, she remembered. Was he making good, somewhere? She felt her heart go out with a rush to this big man she had never seen, and she found herself eagerly looking forward to their meeting. "Oh, he must be splendid," she exclaimed impulsively, and her face glowed in the play of the firelight, a glow that faded almost to pallor at the words of the half-breed. He has come again into the woods, he asked quickly. It is well. For now Jeannie need have no fear. He promised her that he would return again into the north, and to her. What? Cried Appleton in surprise. Who is this Jeannie? And why should he return to her? She is my sister, Jax replied simply. Her skin is white like the skin of me father. She is beautiful, and she loves him. She helped Wahatanata to draw him from the river, and through all the long days and nights of his sickness she took care of him. When he went out of the woods she accompanied him for 3 days and 3 nights upon the trail to the land of the white man, and he promised her that he would come again into the woods and protect her from harm. At a hurried glance from his wife Appleton changed the subject abruptly. Wish to thunder it would snow! He exclaimed. Hunting deer without snow is like fishing without bait. You might accidentally hook one, but it's a long chance. Blood River Jack sniffed the air and shrugged, glancing upward. Plenty of snow in a few days, he said. Maybe too much. Chapter 37. In the office. The setting sun shone weak and coppery above the pines as the big 4-horse tote team dashed with a flourish into the wide clearing of the new camp on Upper Blood River. The men had not yet knocked off, and from the impenetrable depths of the forest came the ring of axes and the roar of crashing trees. In the little blacksmith shop a grimy-faced, leather-aproned man bent over a piece of glowing iron which he held in long tongs, and the red sparks radiated in showers as the hammer thumped dully on the soft metal, thumps sharply punctuated by the clean ring of steel as the polished face of the tool bounced merrily upon the chilled surface of the anvil. The feel of snow was in the air, and over by the cook shack men were hauling firewood on a pole drag. The team brought up sharply before the door of the office, which was located at one end of a long, low building of logs, the 2 other rooms of which contained stoves, chairs, and a few rough deal tables. Appleton leaped from the wagon and swung the ladies lightly to the ground, while the teamster and Blood River Jack, assisted by Charlie, proceeded to unload the outfit. The lumberman pushed open the door of the office and glanced within. It was empty. He called one of the men from the cook shack and bade him build a fire in the little airtight. Well, your man ain't an office foreman, anyhow, grinned Sheridan, with a nod of approval toward the cold stove. Sheridan was a bluff man with a bristling red mustache, the kind that invariably chew upon their cigars as they talk. Appleton turned to the ladies. Make yourselves at home, he said as the fire roared up the stovepipe. Ross and I will look over the works a bit. Where is the boss? He asked of the man who was returning to the woodpile. Out in the cuttin' somewheres, maybe over to the rollways, replied the man, laughing. Big Bill, he's out among 'em all the time. By glory. HD, we've all got to hand it to you when it comes to picking out men. I'd like to catch one of my foremen out on the works sometime. I wouldn't know whether to fire him or double his wages. Sheridan mouthed his cigar, and the 2 tummed into a skidway. Appleton smiled. He raised a finger and touched his eyelid. It's the eye, he said. Look in a man's eye, Ross. I don't give a damn what a man's record is, what he's done or what he hasn't done. Let me get a good look into his eye when he talks, and in half a minute I'll know whether to hire him or pass him on to you fellows. Here he comes now. Bill took keen delight in showing the 2 lumbermen about the camp. What's the idea of the L on the bunkhouse? Asked Appleton. Teamster's bunkhouse, replied the foreman. You see, I know how it feels to be waked up at 4 in the morning by the teamsters piling out of their bunks, so I built a separate bunkhouse for them. The men work too hard to have their sleep broken into that way. And another thing, I built a couple of big rooms onto the office where the men can play cards and smoke in the evening. I ordered a phonograph, too. I expect it in on the tote wagon. Sheridan grinned skeptically and spat out part of his cigar. Appleton made no comment. Come over to the office, Bill, he said. I want you to meet the ladies, my wife and niece and Mrs. Sheridan. "I am afraid I am not very presentable," replied Bill dubiously as they crossed the clearing in the lengthening shadows, but he went with them without hesitation. They were met at the door by a plump-faced lady of ample proportions who was evidently fighting a losing battle with a tendency toward embonpoint, and a slight, grey-haired one who stood poised upon the split puncheon that served as a doorstep. "Ladies, this is Bill, the foreman of this camp. Mrs. Sheridan, Bill, and my wife." The ladies bowed formally, and secretly approved of the grace with which the foreman removed his cap and returned their salute. Nevertheless, there was an icy note in Mrs. Appleton's voice as she said, "My niece begs to be excused. She is very tired after her rather hard trip." If Bill noticed the frigidity in the tone, he gave no sign. "I'll imagine it has been a very trying trip for you all. However, I will offer you the best accommodations the camp affords. If you will kindly choose which of those 2 rooms you prefer, I will have your belongings moved in at once. Suppose you brought cots," he added, turning to Appleton. "Yes, everything necessary for a tenderfoot outfit." "When the ladies have selected their room, I will have your gear moved into the other," said Bill, and, with a bow to the ladies, moved off in the direction of the cook shack. Alone in the office, Ethel Manton gazed about upon the meagre furnishings, a desk, the little airtight stove with its huge wood box, 3 wooden chairs, a trunk secured by a padlock, and a bunk neatly laid with heavy blankets. Several pairs of boots, moccasins, and heavy mittens were ranged along the floor next to the wall, while from pegs above them hung a faded mackinaw, a slicker, and several pairs of corduroy trousers. Tacked to the wall above the desk was a large, highly coloured calendar, while upon the opposite wall hung a rifle and a belt of yellow cartridges. Her woman's eye took in the scrupulous neatness of the room and the orderly disposition of various articles. For the first time in her life she was in a man's room, and she felt a keen thrill of interest in her surroundings. Upon the top of the desk beside the little bracket lamp was a short row of books. "It is too bad," she muttered, "that he couldn't have been nice. How I would have enjoyed talking with him and telling him how splendid it is that he is making good. Maybe somewhere a girl is wondering where he is, and waiting day after day for word from him, and worrying her very heart out. Oh, I hope she will never know about this Jeannie, an Indian, and Uncle Appleton said he is a gentleman." She paused before the desk and idly read the titles of the books. There were a logger's manual, a few textbooks on surveying and timber estimating, several of the latest novels, apparently unread, and a well-thumbed copy of Browning. Browning? Of all things, in a log camp. Now I know there is a girl, poor thing. Open, face downward upon the surface of the desk where it had been pushed aside to make room for a rough sketch of the camp with its outreaching skidways and cross halls, lay a small volume. "And so they," she exclaimed under her breath, and picked up the book. It was Madoc, and 3 lines, heavily underscored, stood boldly out upon the page: "3 things a wise man will not trust: the wind, the sunshine of an April day, and woman's plighted faith." Over and over she read the lines, and, returning the book to its place, pondered, as she allowed her glance to rove again over the little room whose every detail bespoke intense masculinity. "Il might at least be nice to him," she murmured. "Maybe the girl was horrid. And he's way up here, trying to forget." Unconsciously she repeated the words of her Uncle Appleton, "He has made good." And then there flashed through her mind the words of the guide, "She is beautiful, and she loves him." She accompanied him for 3 days and 3 nights on the trail to the land of the white man, and he promised that he would come again into the woods and protect her from harm. This Indian girl, she loves him, and he persuaded her to accompany him, and when they drew near to civilization he sent her back, with a promise. Her lips thinned and the hot blood mounted to her cheeks. No matter what conditions sent this man into the woods, there could be no justification for that. She shuddered as she drew her skirts away where they brushed lightly against the blankets of his bunk, and turned toward the door. And just at that moment the door opened, and in the gathering darkness a man stood framed in the doorway. She drew back, startled, and with the swiftness of light her glance swept him from the top of his cap to the soles of his heavy boots. He was a large man whose features were concealed by a thick beard. His fringed and beautifully embroidered shirt of buckskin was open at the throat, as if to allow free play to the mighty muscles of his well-formed neck. Only a few seconds he stood thus, and with a swift movement removed the cap from his head. "You will pardon me," he said, and his eyes sought hers, "I did not know anyone was here." At the first sound of his voice the girl started. One quick step, and she stood before him, staring into his eyes. She felt her flesh grow cold, and her heart seemed gripped between the jaws of a mighty vice. "You," she gasped, and swayed unsteadily as her hand sought her throat. Her voice came dry and hard and choking as she repeated the word, "You." And in that moment the man saw her face in the deepening gloom of the room. "Ethel," he cried, springing toward her with outstretched arms. Then, when she was almost within their grasp, the arms dropped, for the girl shrank from his touch and her eyes blazed. Thus for a moment they stood facing each other, the girl, white, tense, with blazing eyes, and the big man, who fought for control of himself. Finally he spoke, and his voice was steady and very low. "Forgive me, Ethel," he said. "For the moment I forgot that I have not the right, that there is another." With a low, moaning cry the girl covered her face with her hands. Even since she faced him there the thought had flashed through her brain that there might be some mistake, that the man might even yet be as he appeared to be, big and brave and clean. But now, from his own lips she had heard is that other, an Indian. A convulsive shudder shook her whole body, the room seemed to reel, she pressed her hands more tightly to her eyes, as if to shut out the sight of him, and the next instant all was dark, and she pitched heavily forward into the arms of the man. For one brief moment he held her, straining her limp body to his. The hands relaxed and fell away from her pallid face, and the bearded lips bent close above the soft lips of the unconscious girl, but only for a moment. Without touching the lips, the man straightened up and, crossing to the bunk, laid the still form upon the blankets. With never a backward glance, he passed out through the door. It was dark in the clearing, and a couple of steps brought him face to face with Appleton, who was coming to tell his niece that the ladies' quarters were ready. The foreman paused and looked squarely into the face of his employer. He slowly raised an arm and pointed to the open door of the office. "Miss Manton," he said, "has fainted." And without waiting for a reply, passed on into the night. Chapter 38. Charlie finds a friend. The following morning the camp looked out upon a white world. The threatened snow which began during the night was still falling, and from the windows the dark walls of the clearing could be seen but dimly through the riot of dancing flakes. It was a constrained and rather glum party that sat down to breakfast shortly after daylight in the room adjoining the office, where 2 deal tables had been drawn together and spread with a new, white oilcloth. Ethel Manton had entirely recovered from her syncope of the previous evening, and had offered no elucidation other than that of fatigue. Nevertheless, not a person in the room but felt that there had been another and more immediate cause for the girl's collapse. Charlie had begged to be allowed to eat with the men, and the foreman had courteously declined Appleton's invitation to join the party during their stay in camp. The dismal and sporadic attempts at conversation had slumped into an awkward silence, in the midst of which the door burst open and young Charlie catapulted into the room. "Oh, Eth! Guess who he is?" he cried. "Guess who's the boss, the man the Indians call the man who cannot die. It's Bill Carmody. And I knew him the minute I saw him, if he has got whiskers all over his face and a buckskin shin. And he knew me. And he shook hands with me right before all the men, and you ought to seen him look. And he's going to teach me how to walk on snowshoes. Oh, ain't you glad? 'Cause now you and Bill can, Charlie." The girl's face flamed, and the words seemed wrung from her very heart. The boy paused for a moment in the midst of his breathless harangue and eyed his sister with disgust. "You know you do love him," he continued, his eyes flashing defiantly, even if you did have a scrap, and he loves you, too. And that dang St. Ledger's just nothing but squirt, that's what he is, and if I was Bill Carmody I'd punch his head for him if he even spoke to you again, if you was my girl. And I'm going to tell him we know he never swiped those bonds, and you stuck up for him when old man Carmody told you he did. The last words of the boy's remarks were addressed to an empty chair, for the girl, white and trembling, had fled into the other room and banged the door after her. Mrs. Appleton, with an unintelligibly muttered excuse, hurriedly followed, leaving her husband gazing from her retreating back to the excited face of the youngster, and muttering, "Bless my soul." Bless my soul between the gulps of his coffee, which for once in his life he swallowed with never a growl at the canned milk. A moment later he abruptly left the table and, motioning the boy to follow, led the way to the office. A half-hour passed, and Charlie left the building under the strictest kind of orders not to mention to Bill Carmody either Ethel or the bonds. Puzzling his small head over the inexplicable doings of grown-up people, he wandered toward the cook shack to hunt up Daddy Dunnigan, with whom he had already struck up a great friendship. "She loves him and he loves her," he muttered to himself as he scuffed his brand-new moccasins through the soft snow, "and each one tries to let on they don't. And Uncle Appleton won't let me tell Bill she does, so he'd go and tell her he does, and then old man Carmody and his bonds could go to the devil. You bet, I hope I never get in love and act like a couple of fools. Now, I bet she'll marry that sniffet, and he'll marry Blood River Jack's sister." The boy paused and glanced speculatively at the falling snow. "I wonder if he wants to? Anyhow, I can ask him that much." Later, in the office, Mrs. Appleton broke in upon her husband's third black cigar. There was no doorway connecting the office with the other two rooms, and the lumberman watched the snowflakes melt on his wife's hair as she seated herself directly in front of him. "Well, Hubert Appleton, this is a nice mess you have got us into, I must say." "Me?" grinned the man. "Why, little girl, this is your party. I'll wish you would tell me who it was that suggested leaving out young Mr. Holbrook, and coming here so that Ethel could meet this man, him, didn't she? You needn't try to be facetious. What are you going to do about it?" "Who, me? Oh, just stick around and watch the fun." "Fun? Fun? Hubert Appleton, aren't you ashamed of yourself? And that poor girl in there crying her eyes out. Fun, indeed, it's tragedy. There, little woman, don't let's get excited. It's up to us to kind of figure things out a bit, but the young folks themselves will be the real actors. Now, just how much, or how little did she tell you?" "She told me everything. Poor dear, it did her good. She has had nobody to tell, nobody to cry with her and sympathize with her." When his wife concluded, H.D. Appleton had received a VO-accurate chronicle of the doings of Bill Carmody from the time of his boyhood until chance threw them together in the smoking compartment of the westbound sleeper. The lumberman listened attentively, without interrupting, until his wife finished. "Does she think Bill took those bonds?" he asked. "No. She does not. Even with everything else against him, she cannot bring herself to believe that he is a thief." "Do you think he took them?" "Why, I don't know." She hesitated. "Do you think he took them?" The little woman looked into her husband's eyes as she purposely delayed her reply. "No," she said at length. "I do not." "But his own father accused him." Appleton leaned forward in his chair and brought his fist down upon the desktop. "Don't give a damn who accused him," he cried. "That boy never stole a bond, or any other thing, and I'll stake my last cent on it. 011, it isn't the bonds. Ethel does not believe he stole them. But, the other, you heard what the guide said, and Ethel heard it. She never can get over that. He may be honest, but he is a perfect villain. Hold on, now. Let's go easy. Maybe it isn't so bad as it sounds." "Not so bad. Hubert Appleton, do you mean to tell me that you would, for a minute, think of allowing your niece to marry such a man?" Appleton smiled into the outraged eyes of his wife. "Yup. I think I would," he replied, and then hastened to add, "Wait here and I will fetch Blood River Jack. He may have told more than he knows, or he may not have told all he knows. When you come to think of it, from what he did tell, we only jumped at conclusions." He hurried from the office, returning a few minutes later with the half-breed, who seated himself and lighted the proffered cigar with evident enjoyment. "Now, Jack," Appleton began, speaking with his accustomed brevity, "tell us about Monsieur Bill and this sister of yours. Did you say he was going to marry her?" The guide looked from one to the other as if silently taking their measure. Finally he seemed satisfied. "No," he said gravely, "he will not marry Jeannie." The lumberman cleared his throat and waited while the man looked out upon the whirling snow, for well he knew that the half-breed must be allowed to take his own time, he could not be pumped. And Mrs. Appleton, taking her cue from her husband, curbed her impatience, and waited with apparent unconcern. "It is," the guide began, as if carefully weighing his words, "that you are the good friends of MSU Bill. Also I have seen that you know the men of the logs. Wahatanata, my mother, who is old and very wise, knows the men of the logs, and, knowing them, hated MSU Bill, and would have returned him to the river, but Jeannie prevented. For Wahatanata, knowing of the fatherless breeds of the rivers, hated all white men, and a great fear was in her heart for the girl, who is her daughter, and the daughter of Lacombe, whom, she says, was the one good white man, but Lacombe is dead. So always in the days of the summer, when these two would leave the lodge to visit the deserted camp of Muncrossan, Wahatanata followed them. Stealthily and unknown she crept upon their trail, and always her sharp eyes were upon them, and in the fold of her blanket was concealed a long, keen blade, and behind the unfailing gaze of the black eyes was the mind to kill. Thus passed the days of the summer, and the hand of Wahatanata was stayed, but her vigilance remained unrelenting. For deep in her heart is seared the memory of 2 winters ago, when Muncrossan gazed upon the beauty of Jeannie, and came to the teepee in the night, knowing I was away, and Wahatanata fought him in the darkness until he fled, cursing and swearing vengeance. Never since that night has the girl been safe, for Muncrossan, with the cunning of the wolf, is waiting his time, and some day he will strike. But I shared not the fear of my mother that harm would come to Jeannie at the hand of the great Cheshire Coe, for I have looked into his eyes, and I know that his heart is good. Upon the day before his departure for the land of the white man he gave to the girl the skin of Diabolos, and then she told him she loved him, and begged him to remain with her in the country of the Indians. But he would not, for he does not love Jeannie, but another, a woman of his own people, who lives in the great city of the white man. And even though this woman sent him from her, he loves her, and will marry no other." Listening, Wahatanata heard him tell this to Jeannie, but of this woman the girl knew, for he talked incessantly of her, and cried out that she would marry another, in the voice of the fever spirit, in the time of his great sickness. The following day he departed in a canoe, and as he pushed from the shore, Jeannie handed him his mackinaw, and words passed between them that Wahatanata could not hear from her position behind a log. But, as the canoe passed from sight around a bend in the river, the girl plunged into the woods, and Wahatanata returned to the teepee and made up a light pack and slipped silently upon her trail. The girl cut through the forest and came again to the river, and for a night and a day awaited the coming of the canoe. The 3rd evening it came and the man camped, and Jeannie crept close and watched him across the blaze of his little fire as he smoked and stared into the embers. While Wahatanata also crept stealthily to the fire, making no sound, and she came to within an arm's reach off man's back, and in her hand was clutched tightly the sheath knife with its long, keen blade. At the midnight the man unrolled his blankets and laid down to sleep, and then it was that Jeannie stepped into the firelight. And in the deep shadow, Wahatanata gripped more tightly the knife and made ready to strike. The half-breed paused while the others waited breathlessly for him to resume. Think not that Jeannie is bad. She is good, and her heart is the pure heart of a maiden. But, such is the love of woman, to face gladly the sneers of the world, and the wrath of her people, for she did not ask him to marry her, only to take her. But the man would not, and commanded her to return to the lodge. She told him that she could not return, that 3 days and 2 nights had passed since they had departed together, and that, if he would not take her, she would go alone to the land of the white man. Then MSW Bill arose and folded his blankets and made up his pack, and when he spoke to her again it was in the voice of the terrible softness, the softness that causes men first to wonder, and then to obey, though they know not why. He said that he himself would take her back, and that Wahatanata, who is old and very wise, would know that his words were true. Wahatanata, lurking there in the deep shadow, in that moment knew that the man's heart was good. And she stepped into the firelight, and looked long into his eyes, and she broke the knife, and between them there passed the promise. Jax puffed slowly upon his cigar, arose to his feet, and stood looking down upon the two who had listened to his words. "It is well," he said, and his dark eyes flashed, "for the heart of Muncrossan is bad, and the beauty of Jeannie has inflamed the evil passions of him, and he will stop at nothing in the fulfillment of his desire. But, into the north has come a greater than Muncrossan. And terrible will be the vengeance of this man if harm falls upon Jeannie. For he is her friend, his word has passed, his heart is strong and good, and he knows not fear. Upon Muncrossan will fall the day of the great reckoning. And, in that day, justice will be done, for he will stand face to face with Bill, the man who cannot die, the man whom Wahatanata has named the one good white man." Chapter 39. Bill's Way. "And, to think," whispered Mrs. Appleton as she wiped a tear from her eye, after the half-breed's departure, "that in New York this same man had earned the name of Broadway Bill, the sport." "Yes," answered her husband, "but Broadway Bill has passed, and in his place, out here in the big country, is Broad Gauge Bill, the man." "I knew I was right, Margaret, by gad, I knew it." "Look in his eye." Followed, then, in the little office, an hour of intimate conversation, at the conclusion of which the two arose. "Not a word to Ethel," Remember admonished the woman, and laughed knowingly as her husband stooped and kissed her. During the days that followed, Appleton and Sheridan, accompanied by Blood River Jack, hunted from early morning until late evening, when they would return, trail-weary and happy, to spend hours over the cleaning and oiling of guns and the overhauling of gear. Young Charlie was allowed to go on some of the shorter expeditions, but for the most part he was to be found dogging the heels of Bill Carmody, or perched upon a flour barrel in the cook's shack, listening to the tales of Daddy Dunnigan. The ladies busied themselves with the care of the 2 rooms, with useless needlework, and with dummy auction, varying the monotony with daily excursions into the nearby forest in quest of spruce gum and pine cones. Since the morning Charlie had broken in so incontinently upon their breakfast, no reference had been made to Bill Carmody by any member of the party, while the foreman pursued the even tenor of his way, apparently as unconcerned by their existence as they were by his. One afternoon as the ladies were starting upon one of their tramps they came face to face with the foreman, who tipped his cap, bowed coldly, and passed into the office, closing the door behind him. Mrs. Appleton halted suddenly, glanced toward the building, and retraced her steps. It was but a short distance, and Ethel walked back, waiting at the door while her aunt entered their own apartment. The girl watched abstractedly, thinking the older woman had returned for something she had forgotten. Suddenly she became all attention, and a hot flush of anger mounted to her face as she saw her aunt walk to the table, pick up her purse and several rings which she had left, and with a glance at the thick, log wall which separated the room from the office, deliberately walk to her trunk and place the articles under lock and key. Apparently Mrs. Appleton had not noticed the girl's presence, but more than once during the afternoon the corners of her mouth twitched when, in response to some question or remark of hers, the shortness of girl's replies bordered upon absolute rudeness. And late that night she smiled broadly in the darkness when the low sound of stifled sobs came from the direction of the girl's cot. Immediately after breakfast the following morning, Ethel put on her wraps and started out alone. Arriving, after a long, aimless ramble, at the uttermost end of a skidway, she sat upon a log to rest and watch a huge swamper who, unaware of her presence, was engaged in slashing the underbrush from in front of a group of large logs. Finally, tiring of the sight, she arose and started for the clearing, and then suddenly drew back and stepped behind the bole of a great pine, for, striding rapidly toward her on the skidway was Bill Carmody, and she pressed still closer to the tree trunk that he might pass without observing her. He was very close now, and the girl noticed the peculiar expression of his face, an expression she had seen there once before. His lips were smiling, and his grey eyes were narrowed almost to slits. The man halted scarcely 50 feet from her, at the place where the swamper, with wide blows of his axe, was laying the small saplings and shawed low. She started at the cold softness of the tones of his voice. "Leduc," he said, "just a minute, it will hardly take longer." The man turned quickly at the sound of the voice at his side, and for the space of seconds the two big men faced each other on the packed snow of the skidway. Then, with a motion of incredible swiftness, and without apparent effort, the foreman's right arm shot out and his fist landed squarely upon the nose of the huge swamper. The girl heard the wicked spat, and the peculiar, frightened gnmt as the man reeled backward, and saw the quick gush of red blood that splashed down his front and squirted out over the snow. Before the man had time to recover, the foreman advanced a step and struck again. This time it was his left hand that clove the air in a long, clean swing, and the man went down into the snow without a sound as the fist thudded against his neck just below the ear. Without so much as a glance at the man in the snow, Bill Carmody tumbed on his heel and started back down the skidway. Few seconds had elapsed, and a strange, barbaric thrill ran through the girl's body as she looked out upon the scene, quickly followed by a wave of sickening pity for the poor wretch who lay sprawled in the snow. And, then, a great anger surged into her heart against the man who had felled him. She dashed from her hiding place, and in a moment stood facing him, her blue eyes flashing. "You brute," she cried, "what right had you? Why did you strike him?" The man regarded her gravely, lifting his cap politely as if answering a most commonplace question. "Because," he replied, "I wanted to," and, with a curt bow, stepped into the timber and disappeared, leaving her alone in the skidway with the bloody, unconscious form in the snow. Never in her life had Ethel Manton been so furiously angry, not because a man had been felled by a blow, she had forgotten that, but because, in demanding an explanation, in attempting to call Bill Carmody to account, she had laid herself open to his stinging rebuff. Without pretense of defense or justification, the man had quietly told her that he knocked the swamper down because he wanted to, and without waiting for comment, as if the fact that he wanted to was sufficient in itself, had gone about his business without giving the matter a second thought. The flash of anger, which in the first place had prompted her to speak to the man, was but an impulsive protest against what she considered an act of brutality, but that quickly passed. The anger that surged through her heart as she gazed, white-faced, at the spot where the big man disappeared, was the bitter anger of outraged dignity and injured pride. He had not taken the trouble to find out what she thought, for the very obvious reason that he had not cared what she thought, and so he left her. And when he had gone the girl plodded wrathfully back to camp and spoke to no one of what she had seen. But, deep down in her heart, she knew there had been a reason for Bill's act, and she knew that the reason was good. That same evening Appleton pushed his chair back from the table and glanced toward Ethel, who had got out a bit of crochet work. Then, with a sidewise glance at his wife, he remarked thoughtfully, "I'm afraid I'll have to get rid of Bill. A Canuck swamper named Leduc complained to me that the boss slipped up on him and knocked him insensible with a club. I can't stand for that, not even from Bill." At the mention of the foreman's name the girl looked up quickly. "He didn't hit him with a club. He hit him with his fist." And there was the girl stopped abruptly, and a wave of crimson suffused her reason face. She could have bitten her tongue off for speaking, for defending this. "How do you know?" asked her uncle in surprise. "Elle saw him do it," she replied, realizing that, having gone so far, she must answer. "Why did he strike him?" persisted Appleton. "You might ask him that," she said, and, with a defiant toss of her head, quitted the room and closed the door behind her. The Sheridans had been taken into confidence, and when the four found themselves alone they smiled knowingly. As the days slipped into the second week of their stay, the carcasses of many deer hung from poles in the clearing, and the outside walls of the log building were adorned with the skins of numerous wolves and bobcats. Hardly a day passed but someone, by word or look, or covert sneer, expressed disapproval of the boss, and Ethel, entirely ignorant of the fact that these expressions of disapproval were made only in her presence, and for her special benefit, was conscious of a feeling of great pity for the lonely man. The indescribable restlessness of a great longing took possession of her. She found herself, time and again, watching from the window, and from places of concealment behind the trunks of trees, while the big foreman went stolidly about his work. The fact that she should hate Bill Carmody was logical and proper, but she bitterly resented the distrust and criticism of the others. She wished now with all her heart that she had not confided in her aunt, and a dozen times she caught herself on the point of rushing to his defense. Not since that morning on the skidway had the two met. Bill deviated not one whit from the regular routine of his duties, and the girl purposely avoided. She hated him. Over and over again she told herself that she hated and despised him, and yet, on 2 or 3 occasions when she knew he had gone to the farthest reaches of the cutting, she had slipped unobserved into the office and read from his books, not the uncut novels, but the well-thumbed copies of Browning and Southey, and as she read she pondered. She came upon many marked passages, and in her health the unrest continued, and she allowed her hands to stray over the coarse cloth of his mackinaw, and once she threw herself upon his bunk and buried her face in his blankets, and sobbed the dry, racking sobs of her deep soul hurt. Then she had leaped to her feet and smoothed out the wrinkles in the blankets, and stooped and straightened the row of boots and moccasins along the base log, and quickly disarranged them again for fear he might remember how he left them, and rushed from the office. Of these secret visits the members of the party knew nothing, but Daddy Dunnigan, from the window of the cook shack, took note of the girls' comings and goings, and nodded sagely and chuckled to himself. For Daddy Dunnigan, wise in the ways of women, had gathered much from the talk of the impetuous youngster. Chapter 40. Charlie Goes Hunting. Blood River Jack halted suddenly in his journey from the bunkhouse to the grub shack and sniffed the air. He dropped the butt of his rifle to the hard-packed snow of the clearing and glanced upward, where a thin sprinkling of stars winked feebly in the first blush of morning. The dark sky was cloudless, and the trees stood motionless in the gloom, which slowly dissipated where the first faint light of approaching day grayed the east. The air was dry and cold, but with no sting of crispness. The chill of it was the uncomfortable, penetrating chill that renders clothing inadequate, yet brings no tingle to the exposed portions of the body. Again the man sniffed the dead air and, swinging the rifle into the crook of his elbow, continued toward the GMB shack. Appleton and Sheridan accepted without remonstrance the guide's prediction of a storm and retired to the house as the rooms in which the party was quartered had come to be known, not entirely unthankful for a day of rest. The crew went into the timber, as usual. The guide retired to his bunk for a good snooze, and young Charlie Manton, tiring of listening to Daddy Dunnigan's yarns, prowled about the camp in search of amusement. Entering the bunkhouse, his attention was attracted by the loud snoring of Blood River Jack, and his eye fell upon the half-breed's rifle and cartridge belt, which reposed upon the floor just beneath the edge of his bunk. The boy crept close, his soft moccasins making no sound, until he was within reach of the gun, when he dropped to the floor and lifted it in his hands. For many minutes he sat upon the floor examining the rifle, turning it over and over. At length he reached for the cartridge belt, and buckling it about his waist, left the room as noiselessly as he had entered and, keeping the bunkhouse in line with the window of the cook shack, slipped unobserved into the timber. Upon his hunting expeditions with the others, Charlie had not been allowed to cane a high-power rifle. It was a sore blow to his pride that his armament had consisted of a light, 20-gauge shotgun, whose possibilities for slaughter were limited to rabbits, spruce hens, and ptarmigan. Farther and farther into the timber he went, avoiding the outreaching skidways and the sound of axes. Broad-webbed snowshoe rabbits leaped from underfoot and scurried away in the timber, and the whir of an occasional ptarmigan or spruce hen passed unheeded. He was after big game. He would show Uncle Appleton that he could handle a rifle, and maybe, if he killed a buck or a wolf or a bobcat, the next time he went with them he would be allowed to carry a man's-size weapon. An hour's tramp carried him to the bank of the river at a point several miles below the camp, where he seated himself upon a rotten log. Blood River Jack just wanted to sleep today, so he told Em it was going to storm. He soliloquized as he surveyed the narrow stretch of sky which appeared above the snow-covered ice of the river. But somehow the sky did not look as blue as it had. It was a sickly yellow color now, like the afterglow of a sunset, and in the center of it hung the sun, a dull, copper sun, with uneven, red edges which lost themselves in a hazy aureola of yellowish light. The boy glanced uneasily about him. The woods seemed uncannily silent, and the air thick and heavy, so that the white isle of the river blurred into dusk at its farther reaches. It grew darker, a peculiar fuliginous darkness, which was not off gloom of the forest. Yet no smell of smoke was in the air, and in the sky were no clouds. Looks kind of funny, thought the boy, and glanced toward the river. Suddenly all thought of the unfamiliar-looking world fled from his brain, for there on the snow, not 20 yards distant, half-crouched a long, grey body with the claws of an uplifted forefoot extended, and congealed, cat-like lips drawn into a hideous snarl. The other forefoot rested upon the limp, fun-wide body of a rabbit, and the great, yellow-green eyes glowed and waned in the dimming light, while the sharply tufted ears worked forward and back in quick, nervous twitches. "A loop Servier," whispered the boy, and slowly raised Blood River Jack's rifle until the sights lined exactly between the glowing eyes. He pulled the trigger and, at the sharp metallic click with which the hammer descended upon the firing pin, the brute seized the rabbit between its wide, blunt jaws and bounded away in long leaps. Hot tears of disappointment blurred the youngster's eyes and trickled down his cheeks. He had forgotten to load the rifle, and his hands trembled as he hurriedly jammed the long, flask-shaped cartridges into the magazine and followed down to the river on the trail of the big cat. He remembered as he mushed along on his small rackets that Bill had told him of a rocky ledge some 5 or 6 miles below camp, and had promised to take him to this place where the loop servitors had their dens among the rocks. The trail held to the river, whose banks rose more abruptly as he proceeded, and at length, as he rounded a sharp bend, he could make out dimly through the thickening air the outline of a high rocky bluff, but even as he looked, the ledge was blotted out by a quick flurry of snow, and from high among the tree-tops came a long, wailing moan of wind. The trees pitched wildly in the icy blast, the moan increased to a mighty roar, and the air was thick with flying snow. Not the soft, flaky snow of the previous storm, but particles fine as frozen fog, that bit and stung as they whirled against his face in the eddying gusts that came from no direction at all and every direction at once. The boy bowed his head to the storm and pushed steadily forward. He must kill the loop Servier, whose trail was growing momentarily more indistinct. His eyes could penetrate but a few yards into the white smother, and suddenly the dark wall of the rock ledge loomed in front of him, and the trail, almost obliterated now, turned sharply and disappeared between 2 huge, upstanding boulders. Chapter 41. The Blizzard. At 11 o'clock in the morning Bill Carmody ordered his teams to the stables. At 12 o'clock, when the men crowded into the grub shack, the air was filled with fine particles of flinty snow, and the roar of the wind through the pine tops was the mighty roar of the surf of a pounding sea. At 1 o'clock the boss called Gillen, and with loud shouts and rough horseplay, the men made a rush for the bunkhouse. At 2 o'clock Daddy Dunnigan thrust his head through the doorway of the shop where Bill, under the blacksmith's approving eye, was completing a lesson in the proper welding of the broken link of a log chain. With a mysterious quirk of the head he motioned the foreman to follow, and led the way to the cook's shack, where Blood River Jack waited with lowering brow. "Do yez happen to know is THBY up yonder?" asked the old Irishman, with a jerk of his thumb in the direction of the house. Bill beat the dry snow from his clothing as he stared from one to the other. "The boy," he cried. "What do you mean? Come, out with it, quick." "It is that my rifle and belt have gone from under the bunk," Blood River Jack answered. "They were taken while I slept." "The boy did not come to dinner in the grub shack. Is it that he eats today with his people?" "Good Lord, I don't know." "Haven't you seen him, Daddy?" "Not since mebbe it's 9 o'clock in th marnin', and he went to th bunk house. I thought he was wid Jack." Bill thought rapidly and tummed to the old here. "You, Daddy, get a move on now," he ordered. "That ginger cake of yours that the kid likes, hustle some of it into a pail or a basket or something, and caney it up to the house. Tell them it's for Charlie, and you'll find out if he's there. If not, get out by saying that he's probably in the bunkhouse, and get back here as quick as you can make it. There is no use in alarming the people up there, yet. Here you, Jack, go help the old man along. It's a tough job bucking that storm even for a short distance. Come now, beat it." After 10 minutes the two returned, breathless from their short battle with the storm. "He ain't there," gasped the old man and sank down upon the woodbox with his head in his hands. "God help he's out in UT. I'm going to the offals," said the foreman and stepped out into the whirling snow. "Nlan." "Man," called Daddy, springing to his feet, "Li ain't a going to thry." The door banged upon his words and he sagged slowly onto his rough seat. A few minutes later Appleton stamped into the cook's shack. "Did you find him, Daddy?" he asked. The old man shook his head. "He ain't in Thigh camp," he muttered. "He took Jack's gun whilst he slippin' UT's huntin'. He's gone, lard hilp 11 "Where is Bill?" the lumberman inquired. "Av ye quick, ye may catch in th office, av ye ain't oil'm thinking ye never will find Bth Luke in his eye, he's gone after thby." The lumberman plunged again into the storm and made his way to the office. It was empty. As he turned heavily away the door opened and Ethel Manton flung herself into the room, gasping with exertion. Giving no heed to her uncle's presence, the girl's glance hurriedly swept the interior. Her hand clutched at the bosom of her snow-powdered coat as she noted that the faded mackinaw was gone from its accustomed peg and the snowshoes from their corner behind the door. Instantly the nuth flashed flew off her brain. Charlie was lost in the seething blizzard and somewhere out in the timber Bill Carmody was searching for him. With a smothered moan she flung herself onto the bunk and buried her face in the blankets. The situation the foreman faced when he plunged into the whirling blizzard in search of the boy, while calling for the utmost in man's woodsmanship and endurance, was not so entirely hopeless as would appear. He remembered the intense interest evinced by the boy a few days before, when he had listened to the description of the rocky ledge which was the home of the Loop Surveys, and the eagerness with which he begged to visit the place. What was more natural, he argued, than that the youngster, finding himself in unexpected possession of a rifle and ammunition, had decided to explore the spot and do a little hunting on his own account. The full fury of the storm had not broken until noon, and he figured that the boy would have had ample time to reach the bluff where he could find temporary shelter among the numerous caves of its rocky formation. Upon leaving the office, the boss headed straight for the rollway, and the mere holding his direction taxed his brain to the exclusion of all other thoughts. The air was literally filled with flying snow fine as dust, which formed an opaque screen through which his gaze penetrated scarcely an arm's reach. Time and again he strayed from the skidway and brought up sharply against a tree, But each time he altered his course and floundered ahead until he found himself suddenly upon the steep slope where the bank inclined to the river. When Bill Carmody turned downstream, the gravity of his undertaking forced itself upon him. The fury of the storm was like nothing he had ever experienced. The wind whipped particles cut and seared his face like a shower of red-hot needles, and the air about him was filled with a dull roar, mighty in volume but strangely muffled by the very denseness of the snow. It took all his strength to push himself forward against the terrific force of the wind, which seemed to sweep from every quarter at once into a whirling vortex of which he himself was the center. One moment the air was sucked from his lungs by a mighty vacuum, and the next the terrible compression upon his chest caused him to gasp for breath. The fine snow that he inhaled with each breath stung his lungs, and he tied his heavy woolen muffler across his mouth. He stumbled frequently and floundered about to regain his balance. He lost all sense of direction and fought blindly on, each bend of the river bringing him blunderingly against one or the other of its brush-grown bank. The only thought of his benumbed brain was to make the rock ledge somewhere ahead. It grew dark, and the blackness, laden with the blinding, stinging particles, added horror to his bewilderment. Suddenly his snowshoe struck against a hard object, and he pitched heavily forward upon his face and lay still. He realized then that he was tired. Never in his life had he been so utterly body-weary, and the snow was soft and warm, and the pelting ceased. He thrust his arm forward into a more comfortable position and encountered a rock, and sluggishly drew off his benumbed faculties past a train of associated ideas: rock ledge, loop Serviers, the boy. With a mighty effort he roused himself from the growing lethargy and staggered blindly to his feet. He filled his lungs, tore the ice-encrusted muffler from his lips and, summoning all his strength, gave voice to the long call of the woods, "Hoo-oo-pee-ee-ee." But the cry was cut off at his lips. The terrific force of the shifting gusts hurled the sound back into his throat so that it came to his own ears faint and far. Again and again he called, and each time the feeble effort was drowned in the dull roar of the storm. An unreasoning rage at the futility of it overcame him, and he plunged blindly ahead, unheeding, stumbling, falling, rising to his feet and staggering among the tumbled rocks at the foot of the bluff, and then, almost in his ear came the sharp, quick sound of a rifle shot and another, at a second apart, the distress signal of the Northland. Chapter 42. Bucking the storm. Bill Carmody wheeled against the solid rock wall and frantically felt his way along its broken surface. His groping hands encountered a cleft barely wide enough to admit the passage of a man's body. With a final effort he called again. Instantly the high, clear tones of the boy's voice rang in his ears from the depths of the rock cavern, and the next moment small hands were tugging at his armpits. "Oh, Bill, I knew you would come," a small voice cried close to his ear. "It was my last 3 shots. I've been shooting every little while for hours and hours. Hold on. We've got to take off your snowshoes, they won't come through the door." A few minutes later the man sat upon the hard floor of the cave, which reeked of the rank animal odor of a long-used den. The place was bare of snow, and he leaned back against a soft, furry body while the boy rattled on, "I killed the loop Servier. I chased him in here and shot him right square through the head. And he never kicked, just slunked down in a heap and dropped his rabbit. And now, if we had some matches, we could build a fire if we had some wood, and cook him. I'm hungry, aren't you?" The boy's utter disregard of the real seriousness of their plight, and the naive way in which he accepted the coming of his friend as a matter of course, irritated the man, who listened in scowling silence. "Blood River Jack was light," Charlie went on. "El thought he just wanted a chance to sleep for a day. Pretty good storm, isn't it? Say, Bill, how did he know it was going to snow?" "Look here, young man," Bill replied wrathfully, "do you realize that we are in a mighty bad fix, right this minute? And that it is your fault? And that there was only about 1 chance in 1,000 that I would find you? And that if we ever get out of this, and your Uncle Appleton don't give you a darn good whaling, I will." The man felt a small body press close against him in the darkness. "Honest, Bill, I'm Sony," a subdued voice answered. "I thought Jack was fooling, and I did want to show him I could kill something bigger than a rabbit." "You aren't mad, are you, Bill? I hope Eth won't worry. We'll probably have to stay here all night, won't we?" "All night? Won't worry. Don't you know that this is a regular blizzard, the kind that kills men at their own doors, and that it may last for a week? And here we are with no firewood, and nothing to eat. The chances are mighty good that we'll never see camp again, and you pipe up and hope your sister won't worry." Charlie leaned over closer against Carmody's body. "Why, we've got to get back, Bill," he said, and his voice was very earnest now. "We're all Eth's got, you and me, and she needs us." The boy felt a sudden tightening of the muscles beneath the heavy mackinaw, and the quick gasp of an indrawn breath. A big arm stole about his shoulders. The harshness was gone from Bill's voice, and when he spoke the sound fell softly upon the culprit's ears. "Sure, kid, we'll get back. Buck up. We've got a fighting chance, and that's all we need, men like you and me. Life up here is a hard game, kid, but we are no quitters. This is just one of the rough places in the long, long trail. And, say, kid, just man to man, I want you always to remember that, she needs you, and someday she may need you bad. This St. Ledger may be all right, but, St. Ledger." The voice of the boy cut sharply upon the darkness. "Say, Bill, you aren't going to marry Blood River Jack's sister, are you?" "What?" "Why, Blood River Jack's sister, you know, that helped fish you out of the river." "Lord! No. Whatever put that into your head?" "Blood River Jack told us when we were coming out about you, only we didn't know it was you, then. And he said that his sister was pretty, and she loved you, and she went down the river with you for 3 or 4 days, or something. And Eth thinks you love this half-breed girl. And, maybe, if I did marry her, Eth would marry St. Ledger, but she don't love him." Bill sat suddenly erect, and the arm about the boy's shoulder tightened and shook him roughly. "Look here. How do you know?" "I read an account of their engagement way along last winter." "That was a dang lie. 'Cause I was in the den when she called St. Ledger up about it. She gave him the darndest talking to he ever got, and she told him she never would marry him as long as she lived. And Eth does love you. And you ought to heard her stick up for you when old." The boy stopped abruptly, suddenly remembering his uncle's injunction of silence. "There's an old dead tree right close to the door of the cave," he added hastily. "We might get some wood off that." "What were you saying?" inquired Bill. "Never mind the wood, nothing, I forget, I mean. Come on, let's get some wood, I'm hungry." And in spite of his most persistent efforts, not another word could Bill Carmody get out of the youngster, except the mournful soliloquy that, "I'll bet Uncle Appleton will whale me, anyway, he couldn't whale as hard as you." In the thick blackness of the storm the man groped blindly near the snow-choked entrance to the den, guided in his search for the dead tree by the voice of the boy from the interior. It was no easy task to twist off the dead limbs and carry them one by one to the cavern where the boy piled them against the wall. At length, however, it was accomplished, and Bill crept in and whittled a pile of fine shavings. A few minutes later the flicker of a tiny flame flashed up, the shavings ignited, and the narrow cavity lighted to the crackle of the fire. Together they skinned the rabbit which the dead lynx had dropped, and soon they were busily engaged in roasting it over the flames. The two were far from comfortable. Despite the fact that the fire had been built as near as possible to the entrance, the smoke whipped back into their faces. The air became blue and heavy, they coughed, and tears streamed from their eyes at the sting of it. "I'm thirsty," said the boy, as he finished his portion of the rabbit. "I'll guess we'll have to eat snow, there's nothing to melt it in." "Never eat snow," the man cautioned as his eyes swept the barren interior. "Why not? It will burn you out." "I don't know why, but when a man starts eating snow, it's all off." Directly in front of him, in the rock floor, was a slight depression, and with a stick Bill scraped the fire close to this natural basin and filled it with dry snow. At the end of 10 minutes the snow had melted, leaving a pool of filthy, black water. "It's the best we can do," laughed the man as the boy made a wry face as he gulped down a swallow of the bitter floor washing. They set about skinning the loop cervier, and spread the pelt upon the floor for a robe. "We'll have to tackle the cat for breakfast," grinned Bill. "Oh, this is fun," cried the boy. "It's like getting cast away and living in a cave, like you read about." But the humor of the situation failed to enthuse Bill, who lighted his pipe and stared moodily into the tiny fire. The two spent a most uncomfortable night, their brief snatches of sleep being interrupted by long hours of wakefulness when they huddled close to the small blaze. The scarcity of wood and the danger of suffocation precluded the building of an adequate fire, and the miserable night wore interminably upon the nerves of the imprisoned pair. At last the dull grey light of morning dispersed the gloom, and the two crept to the snow-choked door. The storm raged unabated, and their eyes could not penetrate the opaque whiteness of the powdery snow. Bill gathered more firewood, cut up the lynx, and roasted the hams, shoulders, and back. The meat was dry and stringy, with a disagreeable, strong flavor that savored intimately of the rancid odor of the den. Nevertheless, they devoured a great quantity of the tough, unpalatable food, washing it down with bitter draughts from the pool of dirty snow water, thick with ashes and the pungent animal reek. Again the man filled his pipe and sat gazing out upon the whirling void. "Bill, let's try it," said a voice at his elbow. "She's waiting for us, and worrying." Carmody glanced quickly into the determined little face. The boy had voiced his own thoughts to the letter, and he remained long without speaking, carefully weighing the chances. "It's better than staying here," pursued the youngster, "'cause, if we don't suffocate, we'll starve to death, or freeze. We can tie us to each other so we won't get lost, and all we got to do is stick to the river. I can make it if you can," he added naively. Bill grinned, and then his eyes became serious and he began methodically to stow the remains of the roast cat into his pockets. "It's going to be an awful pull, kid. You are a man, now, and I'll give it to you straight, maybe we'll make it, and maybe we won't. But I'd hate to suffocate, and she is worrying. We'll try it, and God help us, if we don't keep the river." The skin of the lynx was cut into strips and fashioned into a rawhide line which Bill made fast to their belts, leaving plenty of slack to allow free use of the rackets. The rifle was left in the cave, and, muffled to the ears, the two stepped out into the storm. Bill judged it to be well after noon when a sudden tightening of the line brought him to an abrupt halt. Many times during the long hours in which they forged slowly ahead had the line gone taut as the boy fell in the snow, but each time it was followed by a wriggling and tugging, and the youngster scrambled gamely to his feet and floundered on in the wake of his big friend. But this time Carmody waited in vain for the movement of the line that would tell him that the boy was regaining his feet. The line remained taut, and Bill turned and groped in the snow. He lifted the boy to his feet, but the small body sagged limply against his own, and the head rolled weakly. He shook him roughly and, with his lips close to the boy's ear, shouted words of encouragement. But his only answer was a dull look from the half-closed eyes, and a sleepily muttered jumble of words, in which he made out, "Can't make it, all in go on, she does love you." Again and again he tried to rouse him, but all to no purpose. The boy had battled bravely to the end of his endurance, and now only wanted to be let alone. Bill sat beside him in the snow and, sheltering him as best he could from the sting of the wind-driven pafflicles, produced a piece of the meat from his pocket. The boy gnawed it feebly, and the food revived him somewhat, so that for a few rods he staggered on, but the line again tightened, and this time the man knew that it was useless to attempt to arouse his little companion. Hurriedly removing his mackinaw, He wrapped it around the body of the boy and, by means of a squaw hitch sling, swung him to his back. The boy's dangling rackets hindered his movement, and he slashed the thongs and left them in the snow. Then, straining the last atom of his vitality, he plunged ahead. The early darkness of the North Country settled about the staggering man. His progress was painfully slow and, without sense of direction, he wallowed forward, stumbling, falling, struggling to his feet only to fall again a few rods farther on. The weight of the boy seemed to crush him into the snow, and each time it became harder and harder to regain his feet against the merciless rush of the blizzard. He lost all hope of making camp. He did not know whether it was near or far, he only knew that he was upon the river, and that he must push on, and he realized dully that he might easily have passed the rollways hours ago. He even considered doubling back, but what was the use? If he passed them once, he would pass them again. Every drop of his fighting blood was up. He would push on to the end. He would die, of course, but he wouldn't die yet. And when he did die, he would fall to die, he would never lie down to die. It was not far off, he knew that fall, when he would never get up. He wondered who would find them, Blood River Jack, probably. As he leaned into the whirling, cutting wind, he thought of Jeannie and of his promise to Ahata. His fists clenched, and a few more rods were gained. He thought of Ethel, and of what Charlie had told him in the cave, "She needs us, we're all she's got, you and me." Again the fists in the heavy mittens clenched, and more rods were covered. It was growing black, the white smother of snow ceased to dance before his eyes. His advance now was hesitating, dogged, each step became a measure of time. He reeled suddenly against an unyielding object. A tree, he thought, and grasped it for support as he struggled to get his bearings. He was off the river, yet, when had he ascended the bank? The tree felt smooth to the touch, and he moved his mittens up and down the trunk. Suddenly he realized that it was no tree, but a skin pole. His numbed brain groped dully as his hands traveled up and down its smooth length. At the height of his waist he encountered a rope, and at the feel of the heavy line the blood surged to his head, clearing his brain. "The waterhole," he cried thickly. "They've roped off the waterhole." Frantically he pulled himself along, hand over hand. The rope seemed endless, stretching from stake to stake. He was ascending the bank now at the foot of the rollways, and, at the top was the camp. He exerted his strength to the uttermost ounce, heaving and lifting with the huge muscles of his legs, and pulling with his arms until it seemed they must be torn from his shoulders, inching himself along, gasping, sweating, straining. The incline grew steeper, his frozen mittens slipped, the guide rope tore from his grasp, and he pitched heavily backward into the soft smother. He struggled helplessly. Something seemed pressing him down, down. At last he was home. He had won out against the terrible odds, and the boy was safe. He had brought him back to her, and now he must sleep. How warm and comfortable it was in the bunk. He did not know a man could be so sleepy. What was it the girl was singing as he passed her window only a few nights ago, when he paused in the darkness of the clearing to listen? Dreamily the words floated through his brain, "And the women are weeping and wringing their hands for those who will never come back to the town." But he had come back. He smiled vaguely. They needn't wring their hands and weep, and the rest of it, for men must work, and women must weep, and the sooner it's over the sooner to sleep, and goodbye to the bar and its moaning. Sleep. That's what he needed, sleep. He could sleep forever and ever, here in his warm, warm bunk. And the moaning of the bar, he liked that, he could hear it moaning now, roaring and moaning. Bill Carmody closed his eyes. The fine, sifting snow came and covered his body and the smaller body of the boy who was lashed firmly to his broad back, and all about him the blizzard howled and roared and moaned. And it was night. Chapter 43. In camp again. The violence of the storm precluded the use of horses about the camp, and the trail that slanted from the clearing to the waterhole was soon drifted high with snow, rendering useless the heavy tank sled. Fallon, who had been placed in temporary charge of the camp, told the men into water shifts. Barrels were lashed to strong sleds and man-hauled to the top of the bank, where the guide rope had been NM'd to the waterhole. The men of the shift formed a long line reaching from the sled to the river, and the water dipped from the hole cut in the ice was passed from man to man in buckets to be dumped into the barrels and distributed between the stables, cook shack, bunkhouse, and house. Darkness had fallen when the men of the afternoon shift wallowed toward the river upon the last trip-off second day of the great blizzard. The roar of the wind as it hurled the frozen panicles against their cold benumbed faces drowned their muttered curses as, 30 strong, they pushed and hauled the cumbersome sled to the top of the bank. Seizing the buckets, they strung out, making their way down the steep slope with one hand on the guide rope. Suddenly the foremost man stumbled and fell. He scrambled profanely to his knees and began feeling about in the thick darkness for his bucket. His mittened hand came into contact with the object which, protruding from the snow, had tripped him, and with a vicious wrench he endeavoured to remove it from the trail. It yielded a little, but remained firmly imbedded. With a wild yell he forgot his bucket and began digging and clawing in the snow, for the object he grasped was the bent ash edge of a snowshoe, and firmly lashed in the centre of the webbing was the moccasined foot of a man. Other men came, floundering and sprawling over each other in the darkness, and the word was bellowed from lips to listening ear that a man lay buried beneath the drift. Dig! Ye Turias, roared Fallon as his heavy mittens gouged into the snow. Dig! You th boss, he yelled into the ear of nearest man. I know them rackets. And from lip to bearded lip the word passed, and the big men of the logs redoubled their efforts, but the fine snow had packed hard around the prostrate form, and it was many minutes before they had uncovered him sufficiently to note the smaller body lashed tightly upon his back. The frozen lash was soon severed and the two exanimate bodies lifted in eager hands. Buckets were left to snow under as the men crowded up the bank, howling into each other's ears. Big Stromberg, who bore the boss in his arms, was propelled up the steep slope by the men who crowded about him, pushing, pulling, hauling, the ground-gaining, revolving wedge of the old days of mass formation in football. To th Offelswidam, roared Fallon in Stromberg's ear as they milled across the clearing. Thbysl crowd thy bunkhouse till they hind a more thin hilp. The boy responded quickly to vigorous treatment and stimulants and was removed to his own bunk and placed under the able care of his Aunt Margaret and Mrs. Sheridan. In the office Ethel Manton, white-faced and silent, watched breathlessly the efforts of Appleton and Blood River Jack to revive the exhausted and frozen foreman. The lumber magnate unscrewed the silver cap from a Morocco-covered flask and poured out a generous dose of liquor, but before it reached the unconscious man's lips the half-breed stayed his hand. "MSU Bill drinks no whiskey," he said. Even in the time of his great sickness would he drink no whiskey, and if you give him whiskey he will be very enny. Appleton paused and glanced curiously from the face of the half-breed to the still form upon the bunk, and the other continued, "It is strange, I do not know, but he told it to Jeannie one day, that, in the great city of the white man is a girl he loves. He used to drink much whiskey, and for that reason she sent him from her, and now he drinks no whiskey, even though this girl has married another." Ethel stared at the speaker, wide-eyed, and the pallor of her face increased. "Married another," she gasped. Jax regarded her gravely. "I know nothing except it was told me by Jeannie," he returned, how he talked in the voice of the fever spirit, that this girl would marry another. In the paper he read it, but even so, will he drink no whiskey? 1 week ago did he not hear how one night in the bunkhouse Leduc tried to make the little boy drink whiskey? And did he not hunt up Leduc the next morning, and, upon the skidway, smash the nose of him and knock 4 teeth from his jaw? The guide paused, and Appleton slowly screwed the silver top to his flask and returned it to his pocket. Upon the stove is a pot of very strong coffee which Daddy Dunnigan told me to bring, Jax went on, and he is even now making broth in the cook's shack. MSU Bill cannot die. The strong coffee and the good broth will bring him back to life, for he is called in the woods the man who cannot die. If he could die he would die in the blizzard. For, since blizzards were known, has no man done a thing like this, to search for 2 days and a night for one boy lost in the snow, and carry him home in safety. The half-breed finished, and the girl, with a low cry, sank into a chair and, leaning forward upon the desk, buried her face in her arms while her shoulders shook with the violence of her sobbing. Appleton crossed to her side and laid a hand gently upon her shoulder. "Come, Ethel," he said, "this has been too much for you. Let me take you to the house." But the girl shook her head. She raised her eyes, wet with tears, and with an effort controlled her voice. "My place is here, with him," she said softly as she arose, and, walking to the side of the cot, looked down at the set face of the unconscious man. "Leave me alone now. There is nothing you can do. I will stay with him while you sleep. Draw your cot close to the wall, and if I need you I will knock. Jax will go to the cook shack," she added, turning to the half-breed, "and when the broth is ready bring it to me." The men obeyed without question, and as the office door closed behind them the girl dropped to her knees beside the bunk and, throwing her arms about the man's neck, pressed her soft cheek close against his bearded face. The little tin lamp in its bracket beside the row of books on the top of the desk was turned low and its yellow light illuminated dimly the interior of the rough room. She slipped into an easier position and, seated upon the floor at the edge of the low bunk, drew his head close against her breast. At the touch, the feel of this strong man lying helpless in her arms, the long, pent yearning of her soul burst the studded bonds of its restraint and through her whole body swept the torrent of a mighty love. Resistlessly it engulfed even nerve and fibre of her, wave upon wave of wild, primitive passion surged through her veins until her heart seemed bursting with the sweet, intense pain of it. Fiercely, in the hot, quick flame of passion, she strained him to her breast and her lips sought his in an abandon of feverish kisses. And in that moment she knew that, in all the world of men, this man was her man. Always he had dominated her life. Always she had known this great love, had fought against it, and feared it, and always she had held it in check. But now, alone in the night, with the man lying helpless in her arms, this mighty passion welled to the bursting of restraint. Her helt, subservient no longer to the will of her brain nor to creeds nor the tenets of convention, had this night come into its own, and she loved with the hot, savage mate love of her pristine forebears. The man's lips moved feebly upon hers and the closed eyelids fluttered. The girl sprang to the stove and returned a second later bearing a thick porcelain cup steaming with strong, black coffee. She raised his head upon her arm and, holding the cup, let part of its contents trickle between his lips. He strangled weakly and swallowed. Again she tilted the cup and again he swallowed. "My darling! My darling," she sobbed as the fluttering eyelids half opened and the lips moved, and then leaned close to catch their faintest murmur. "Jeannie," he whispered, "Jeannie, little girl," and then the lips ceased to move. He shuddered slightly through the length of him, his eyes closed, and he slept. The thick cup thudded heavily upon the floor and its contents splashed unheeded over her gown, as the girl sat motionless, staring past the bunk at the blank wall of logs. The little nickel-plated alarm clock ticked loudly in sharp, insistent threes, as she sat, white of face, with set lips and unwinking eyes staring stonily at the parallel logs of the wall. Centuries of supercultivation and the refinement of breeding were concentrated in that white-lipped, cold-eyed stare, which is the heart mask of the re-church woman of empire. And then, the mask dropped. The inevitable artificiality of years of unconscious eugenic selection melted in a breath before the fierce amouche of savage emotion. The girl sprang to her feet as the hot blood surged to her face and paced frantically back and forth in a fume of primordial hate. Her small fists clenched till pink nails bit deep into soft, pink palms. Her nostrils dilated, quivering, her eyes flashed, and the breath hissed through her lips in deep sobs of impotent rage against the woman who had robbed her of this man's love and whose name was upon his lips in the first moment of his awakening. She paused and gazed into the face of the man who was the hero of her fondest dreams, the man who had overcome obstacles, who defied danger and death, and had won, with his 2 hands and the great force of his personality, the respect and devotion of the big men of the rough country. And he was hers, never had he been aught else but hers, and she had lost him. Wildly she resumed her restless pacing, while the words of the half-breed rang in her ears, "She is beautiful, and she loves him." She halted abruptly, and in her eye flashed a momentary ray of hope. The man had said, not he loves her but, she loves him. Could it be? But, no, there were his own words, spoken at the time of their first meeting in the gloom of this VO room, "I forgot that I have not the right, that there is another." And was it not her name that sprang to his lips in the half-consciousness of a few moments ago? In her mind she pictured the wild, dark beauty of the other girl, and in the jealous fury of her heart could have torn her in pieces with her 2 hands. MSU Bill drinks no whiskey. The dream of her life had been realized, but in the realization she had been beaten. All her hopes and prayers, the long, bitter hours of her soul anguish, which bummed and gnawed beneath the stoicism and apathy her environment demanded, had gone for naught, and she, who had borne the brunt of the long battle, was brushed aside and forgotten. The spoils belonged to another, and that other, an Indian. Chapter 44. The Missing Bonds. The walls of the room seemed the restraining bars of a prison, shutting her apart from life and the right to love. She lifted the latch and flung open the door, standing upon the threshold amid the seething inrush of the storm. The fine snow felt good against her throbbing temples, and she stared into the blackness whose whirling chaos voiced the violence of the heart storm that raged within her breast. He had conquered the storm. She shivered as an icy blast sent the snow powder flying half across the room, closed the door, and resumed her tireless journey to and fro, and at each turn she glanced at the sleeping man. She dropped to her knees beside the bunk and looked long into his rugged face. He, too, had suffered. She remembered the deep hurt in his eyes at their parting. Yet he was not beaten. She had sent him from her, heartsick and alone into the great world, and he had fought and conquered and earned a place among men. And as the girl looked, her eyes grew tender and the pain in her heart seemed more than she could bear. When she rose to her feet the savage hatred was gone from her heart, and in its place was determination, the determination to win back the love of this man. She, too, would fight, even as he had fought, and win. He had not been discouraged and beaten. She remembered the look upon his face as he strode toward her that morning on the skidway in search of Leduc. Unconsciously her tiny fists doubled, her delicate white jaws squared, and her eyes narrowed to slits, even as his had narrowed, but her lips did not smile. He was her man. She could give him more than this half-breed girl could give him, and she would fight to win back her own, that which had been her own from the first. Almost at her feet upon the floor, just under the edge of the bunk where it had been carelessly tossed, lay his mackinaw of coarse, striped cloth. The girl stooped, drew it forth, and smoothed it out. His coat she breathed almost reverently as she patted its rough folds. He took it off and wrapped it around Charlie. Oh, it must have been terrible, terrible. She was about to hang it upon its peg when something fell to the floor with a sharp slap, a long, heavy envelope that had dropped from a ragged tear in the lining where the men had ripped it from the body of the boy. She hung the garment upon its peg and stooped to recover the packet. The envelope was old, and had evidently been exposed to the action of water, for the flap gaped open and the edges were worn through at the ends. Upon one side was tightly bound a photograph, dim and indistinct from the rub of the coarse cloth. Her lips tightened at the commas as she stepped to the desk and turned up the lamp. She would see what manner of girl it was who had scored so heavily against her in this battle of hearts. She held the picture close to the yellow flame and stared unbelievingly at the nearly effaced features. With a swift movement she tore the encircling cord from the packet and examined it more closely. Her heart beat wildly, and the blood surged through her veins in great, joyous waves. For the photograph showed, not the dark features of the Indian girl, but her own. Worn almost beyond recognition it was, with corners peeled and rolled back from the warped and water-thickened mounting, but unmistakably her picture. He cares. He does care, she repeated over and over. Oh, my boy. My boy. And then her eyes fell upon the thick envelope with its worm edges and open flap which lay unheeded upon the desk top. Mechanically she reached for it, and her hand came in contact with its thick, heavily engraved contents. She raised the papers to the light and stared. There were 5 in all, neatly folded, lying one upon another. The green background of the topmost one was faded and streaked, and a thin, green wash had trickled over the edges of the others, staining them. A yellow slip of paper fluttered to the desk. She picked it up and read the almost illegible, typewritten lines. It was a memorandum addressed to Strang, Liebart & Co., and bearing the faded signature of Hiram Karmody. A sudden numbness overcame the girl. She sank slowly into the chair in front of the desk and stared dully from the yellowed slip of paper to the faded green bonds. The room seemed suddenly cold, and she stared, unseeing, at her bloodless fingertips. She tried to think, to concentrate her mind upon the present, but her brain refused to act, and she muttered helplessly, the bonds, he took the bonds. Like one in a dream, she arose and replenished the fire in the little air-tight. It had burned almost to ashes. She watched the yellow flames lick hungrily at the bubbling pitch of the knot she had thrown upon the coals, and glanced from the flaring flames to the little pile of green papers, and back again at the little flames that climbed higher about the resinous chunk. Why not, she muttered. They can never prove he took them, and he would think that they were lost. For a long time she sat, thinking, and then she closed the stove and returned to the desk. I stood by him when his father accused him, she murmured, when I thought he was innocent. And now, oh, I can't. I can't give him up. Her voice quavered pitifully, and she clutched at the hurt in her throat. I can't, she gasped again. He needs me now. He is mine. Mine, she cried fiercely. We will work it out together. He was weak then, but now he is strong. I will tell him that I know, and persuade him to return them. And then he will be clean, brave and strong and clean. She staffed nervously at the sound of a fumbling at the latch. Hastily catching up the bonds, she thrust them into the bosom of her gown and turned to face Blood River Jack, who entered, bearing a steaming pail of broth and a larger pail covered with a clean white cloth. Behind him Daddy Dunnigan noisily stamped the snow from his feet. The old man hobbled to the side of the bunk and looked intently into the face of the sleeper, and, stooping, held his ear close to the man's heart. With a satisfied nod he turned to the girl, who stood close by his side. His Schlappenfreund, he said, and the little red-rimmed eyes looked straight into the eyes of Blue. But, miss, here RT hunger has killed more good men thin belly hunger, ye'll find th broth in yon bucket. He joined the half-breed, who waited in silence. At the door he turned and again addressed the girl. In th big buckets ye re-own snack. Et ut before ut gets cowed. When ye redone, wake up and make drink some coffee and all he see in howd avth broth. His th best man in th woods, and ut's up to you to pull tea rough. Before the girl could reply the door closed and the 2 men were swallowed up in the storm. Ethel was surprised to find that she was hungry, and the appetizing luncheon which old Daddy Dunnigan had carefully prepared and packed for her was soon disposed of. The hands of the little alarm clock pointed to 2 as she crossed and knelt at the side of sleeping man. She leaned over and kissed his forehead, his lips, and whispered softly into his ear. Bill, dear. She blushed at the sound of the word, and glanced hurriedly about the room, but there was no one to hear, and the man slept on undisturbed by the tiny whisper. She laid a hand upon his shoulder and shook him gently. "Bill, wake up." He stirred slightly, and a sigh escaped him. "Come, wake up, dear, you must eat." This time she did not blush at the word, and the shaking became more vigorous. Carmody moved uneasily, grunted, and opened his eyes. Ethel started at the steady gaze of the grey eyes so close to her own. The grey eyes closed and he passed a hand slowly across them. "A dream," he muttered, and the girl leaned closer. "No, Bill," she whispered, "fit is not a dream. I am, you know me." "Ethel," he repeated, and the name seemed to linger on his lips. "We must get back to her, kid, she is worrying. Come, mush, kid, mush." The girl laid a soft hand on his forehead and smoothed back the tangled hair. "Bill, dear," she whispered, with her lips close to his, "Charlie is safe. And you are safe, here in the office, with me." Bill seemed suddenly to grasp the situation. "Ethel," he exclaimed. And then, in a dull, tired voice, I brought him back to you." His eyes closed, and he turned his face toward the wall. Ethel poured a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove, and returning, seated herself upon the edge of the bunk. Deftly her arms slipped under his head, and she held the cup to his lips. Bill drank greedily to the last drop, and the girl filled another cup with broth. This time he helped a little, and she raised him higher and pillowed his head against her breast. He sipped the broth hungrily, but very slowly, pausing a long time between sips. Ethel's body thrilled at the touch of him, the little hand that held the cup trembled, and the man, close pressed against her soft breast, heard the wild pounding of her heart. Suddenly he looked up into her eyes. Her face flushed crimson, and the swift down sweep of the long lashes hid the soft, blue eyes from the intense, burning gaze of the hard grey ones. In confusion she averted her face. There was a swift movement beside her, and the next instant strong arms were about her, and she heard, as from afar, the heavy thud as the porcelain cup struck the floor. Vainly she struggled in a sudden frenzy of panic to free herself from the embrace of the encircling arms, and her heart was filled with a great, passionate gladness at the futility of her tiny efforts as she felt herself drawn closer and ever closer against the mighty chest of the big man whom, in spite of herself, and of his own shortcomings and weaknesses, she loved with the savage abandon that is the wonderlove of woman. She knew, too, that the deep music in her ears was the sound of his voice which came in short, stabbing, half-sentences. "Ethel! Ethel! Little girl, you are mine, mine, mine. You do love me. Darling, better than life itself, I love you. I have always loved you. Tell me, dear, it was all a lie, about St. Ledger. Tell me you love me, dearest." The bearded lips found hers, and for answer, her struggles ceased, her body relaxed against his body, her soft arms stole timidly about his neck, and there was a wild singing in her heart. "And there has never been another," she whispered a few minutes later as she sat close beside him and watched him sip hot broth from the thick cup. The grey eyes twinkled. "Don't you know, sweetheart, that there has never been another? Why, you have known me all my life." But the blue eyes were serious. "Mean, since you went away." For answer the man raised his arm and pointed toward the opposite wall. "Hand me that Mackinaw," he said. Ethel gasped and stared at him wide-eyed. The Mackinaw, that old striped coat next to the slicker, he smiled. She stifled the protest, and the man wondered at the sudden pallor of her face. "Hand it here," he repeated, "there is something I want to show you." Without a word the girl crossed the room and, removing the Mackinaw from its peg, laid it upon the blanket within reach of his hand. He drew it to him, and the girl watched in silence while he ran his fingers over the lining. He plunged his arm to the elbow into the ragged hole and explored to the very corners the space between the lining and the cloth. With a blank expression of disappointment he looked up at her. "They are gone," he said in a low voice. "My letters and my picture." "Your letters, dear, and your picture?" "Letters," the girl gasped, leaning forward and staring into his eyes. "Why, yes, darling. There were only a few. You wrote them when I was in Europe. They were all I had, those few little letters, and the photograph. You remember, the one you gave me, but, I don't understand, I always kept it on my desk at home," he continued, ignoring the interruption. "And your letters, too, all sealed in a big envelope. And the morning I went away I bound the picture to the envelope and put it in my pocket, and I have always kept it with me. 1,000 times, dear, I have looked at the picture. It has been my fetish, the little amulet that keeps a man from harm. And whether or not it has succeeded, dear heart, you must judge for yourself. But, the letters, you never took them out, never read them." The man was surprised at the intense eagerness of her tone. "No," he answered, "I never read them. You see, it got to be a sort of game with me. It was a big game that I played against myself, and when I was sure I had won I was going to open the letters." He paused and looked into the girl's eyes. "And then, one day I happened to read in an old newspaper the account of your engagement to St. Ledger. I almost lost the game, then, but I didn't. And, after that, the letters never were the same, and I just played the game to win." There were tears in the girl's eyes, and she clutched at his hand. "But the bonds," she cried. The man regarded her with a puzzled look. "Bonds, bonds, what bonds?" "Why, the bonds you were to have delivered to Strang, Liebart and Company Securities, or something." Bill stared uncomprehendingly, then suddenly he laughed. "Oh. Those. Why, I handed them over to Father. You see, Dad handed it to me pretty straight that morning. In fact, he fired me. So I gave him the bonds and the sentence was never finished." With a glad cry the girl flung herself upon him, and to his unutterable wonder sobbed and sobbed. Chapter 45. Snowbound. Late in the following afternoon Ethel awoke and lay for a long time reveling in her newfound happiness, and thinking of the big man who had come once more into her life, this time bringing her only gladness and the joy of an infinite love. Her heart glowed with pride as she thought of the strength and the fine courage of him, and she flushed as she wondered how, even with the bonds in her hands, she could have doubted his innocence. Ah, well, she would never doubt him again. She smiled fondly, but the smile slowly faded, for in her mind at that moment was a doubt, a vague, elusive doubt, that rested upon the slender fabric of a half-breed's fireside tale. Somewhere in the wild country was another girl, a girl who was beautiful and who loved this man, her man. In the small hours of the morning as they talked he had not mentioned this girl, and Ethel forbore to question him, hoping that he would tell her of his own accord. But whether or not he purposely avoided the subject she did not know. She believed in him, believed in his great love for her, in his absolute honesty and the new-found strength in him. Yet, hovering like a spectre, intangible, elusive, menacing, the one disturbing element in her otherwise perfect happiness, was the other girl. Who was she? What was she? What had she been to him? What had been their relations? And why had she accompanied him on his journey out of the woods? The phantom girl took on a sinister form as the question tantalized her brain. This wild woman had helped to draw him from the river, had nursed him through a long sickness. He was under obligations to her, and was that the only obligation? The girl flushed hotly, and with an impatient movement flung the blankets from her, and proceeded to dress. "I will never, never ask him," she decided, as she sat upon the thick bearskin in front of the stove and drew on her stockings. "He loves me and I love him. If he tells me it will be of his own free will, he shall not know that I ever heard of this girl. What is past, is past. There are sealed chapters in the lives of most men, why should I care? He's mine, mine, she cried aloud, and I love him. But deep down in her heart she knew that she did care, and that she would always care. And the knowledge hurt. Her toilet completed, the girl passed into the other room, where Appleton and Sheridan were engaged in a lively discussion with the ladies. "How is he?" she addressed her uncle, who answered with twinkling eyes. "Bill? Oh, he's all right. Feeling fit as a fiddle. Wanted to get out on the job, but I wouldn't let him. He was going anyhow, and the only way I could make him stay in was to threaten to wake you up to give him his orders straight from headquarters." Ethel blushed furiously as the smiles of the others were directed toward her. "Yup, he wouldn't stand for that," went on Appleton. "Said he'd rather lie in bed for a week than have you puttering around." With a disdainful toss of her head the girl seated herself at the table. "Now, Hubert Appleton, you stop teasing that poor girl." Aunt Margaret rallied in her defense. "Don't pay any attention to him, honey. Bill is doing nicely, and we're all crazy to congratulate you. We think he is just grand." Dinner had been kept piping hot, and Ethel hid her confusion behind an appetizing array of steaming dishes. "And what do you think?" continued her aunt, who hovered about the table with fussy little pats and arrangement of dishes. "We have to stay here all winter." "What?" cried the girl in dismay. "That is just what we both said, Mary and I. But there is no help for it. The tote road is drifted 20 feet deep. Hubert and Mr. Sheridan are going to make the trip on snowshoes, they must get back to business. The supplies will have to be brought in on dog sleds, and we have got to stay." "I'll bet Ethel could think of a worse predicament," grinned Appleton. "She'll be a regular sourdough before spring, won't want to come out." "But I have nothing to wear." "Nothing to wear," scoffed her uncle. "Tell me, please, what in time you women have got packed in those half a dozen trunks, then? It's not grub. I'll bet there's clothes enough in those trunks to last 3 women 14 years. Still, if you really get cold, you might ask Bill to lend you a pair of his, Hubert Appleton." The lumberman glanced at his wife in surprise. "A pair of his moccasins, they'll keep your toes warm." The girl finished her belated dinner, and throwing a coat over her shoulders stepped out into the clear, crisp air. Immediately in front of the building the wind had swept the ground almost bare of snow, but Ethel gasped with surprise as her eyes sought the other buildings of the camp. The blacksmith's shop was entirely buried under a huge drift, only one half of the cook shack roof was visible, and the bunkhouse was buried to the eaves. A 20-foot drift cut off the view of the stables, and the whole crew was busy digging paths and breaking out skidways. The storm had ceased as suddenly as it had come, and the sun shone with dazzling whiteness upon the mystic, snow-buried world. In the office she found Bill fully dressed, propped against his pillows, a villainous black pipe between his lips, reading. He laid aside his book and pipe and stretched his arms toward her. She crossed, blushing, to his side, and for a long time sat with her head resting upon his shoulder, while his great arms held her close against his beating heart. And under the spell of his presence and his gently murmured words of love, the disquieting fear vanished, and she knew that he was all hers. And she laughed at her fear, and drove it from her in the foolish belief that it could never return. "Dear," she said later when their conversation assumed an intelligible form, "you must send those bonds back by Uncle Appleton. Just think, your father thinks you stole them." The man smiled. "Yes, poor old Dad. It must be kind of rough on him to think his son is a thief. He was sore that momming, and so was I, and we didn't part the best of friends. But I would rather return the bonds myself. Darling, we will take them to him, you and I, next summer, when we go back to the old town." "Go back?" exclaimed the girl. "Sure. When we go back on our honeymoon." Now that I have you I am never going to let you go, and when next you see the big berg, you will be Mrs. Bill Carmody. He kissed the serious blue eyes that looked up into his. But, dear, we are coming back here. Back here, he exclaimed in surprise. You? Back here? In the woods? The girl nodded. I love the woods, I will always love them. It was in the woods that you found yourself and your place among men. And it was in the woods that I found you, the real you, the you I have always loved. But, dear heart, it is a rough life up here. It is new to you now, and you are enchanted, but there is so much you would miss. I have to come back, of course, we'll have to for several years to come. We could have a house in Minneapolis, and Charlie could go to school. What? And only have you for 5 or 6 months in the year. No, sir. Charlie could live with Uncle and Aunt Margaret and go to school, but you and I are coming into the woods. Aunt Margaret lived in camps for years when she was first married, and they were as poor as church mice. She told me all about it. Of course, their race hard work, but it is all so big, and grand, and free, and there is lots of fun, too, and you will have to teach me to shoot and walk on snowshoes and fish through holes cut in the ice. I can cook and sew, and we will have a Victrola, and lots of books and things, anyway, that is the way it is going to be, so there is no use arguing about it. And the boss smiled as he realized what Appleton meant when he said, orders straight from headquarters. The two lumbermen took their departure the following morning amid the hearty farewells of the snowbound camp. They were accompanied by Blood River Jack, who reluctantly agreed to see the dog team tote service established before returning to his lodge at the foot of the rapid. We'll come up for you in the spring, called Appleton, and we'll follow the drive in a bateau. You got a bigger taste of the old life than you bargained for, little girl. He smiled at his wife, but the tote road is ruined for this winter and you'll have to make the best of it. HD and I will sure think of you girls while we're sitting in the bald-headed pews at the Gaiety this winter gloating over the grand opera we're missing, called Sheridan, rolling his cigar juicily between his grinning lips. Men of your age, I began Mrs. Sheridan. Hubert Appleton. If I hear, but the protests of the girls fell upon deaf ears as the men disappeared in the wake of the guide, slapping each other upon the back in high glee. The question of grand opera was a joke of long standing between them, and up to the present had been on the husbands, who, despite their protests, had manfully endured their annual week of martyrdom. Cheer up, ladies, smiled Bill. The graphophone is a very good one, and in the office is a whole box of records of my own selection. If we are snowbound we will not have to entirely forego even grand opera. Chapter 46. An announcement. Despite the handicap of the deep snow, results in the new camp were highly satisfactory to Bill Carmody. Not a man in the crew but swore by the boss, and each day threw himself into the work with a will that made for success. And each night, as he rolled into his bunk, not a man but knew that the boss himself had that day worked harder than he. Neither was such a crew in T.H. Woods, Miss boasted Daddy Dunnigan one afternoon as Ethel stood in the door of the cook shack and watched the old man's preparation of the gigantic supper. OIVE logged a bit, here and there, and always OIVE been where men was, but neither OIVE seed buckle down and tear out Th bone, one day with another, save in Th sojourn days AV Captain Front McKim. Th same was Th boss's uncle, and his a McKim Th sol AV his feet to Th peak AV his head, Baron Th liquor, and Th Mendel go T rough hell and hoy watha fur beggin' ye re pardon, and he ain't no dommed angel, nather, beggin' you Glyn, miss. Ye should see Th hand AV poker he plays, and Th beautiful swearin' AV when things goes wrong. And ye should see for it onst. And now he's gone and poshed at a 5% bonus AV they bait mun crossins cut, and Ut's loik handen ut to cause he knows Th bice is already doing their domdest, beggin' ye re pardon, miss. Oil bet me Winther's wages, come SHPRing, we'll have mun crossin' schnode under dapeth in yon smithy, and they had to tunnel to find UT. The girl laughed happily and passed on with a great love in her heart for Daddy Dunnigan and the big, rough men out in the timber who were tearing out the bone that her man might make good. Day by day the black pyramids of the rollways lengthened, and the skidways were pushed farther and farther into the timber. And, of all the men in the crew, none worked harder nor to better purpose than Stromberg, the big hulking Swede, whom Fallon had warned Bill was the brains of Mun Crossan's Bird's Eye gang. Neither Bill nor the big swamper had ever alluded to that affair in the bunkhouse upon the night of their first meeting, and it was with a feeling of surprise that the foreman looked up one evening as he sat alone in the little office to see Stromberg enter and cross to his side. The man lost no time in coming to the point. "Bill," he began, "I went up with Buck Mun Crossan this summer to bring down the Bird's Eye. We found a pile of ashes where the logs should have been. Mun Crossan thinks Creed burned them, or let someone do it. It was a crooked game, and I was in it as deep as anyone. I ain't trying to beg off, but I'd rather be square than crooked, and that's the truth. I ain't spent most of my life in the woods not to be able to tell hardwood ashes from softwood, and I know you slipped one over on us. You're going to make good in the woods. You'll be the big boss, someday. I expect to do time for my part in the Bird's Eye game, and I'll take all that's coming to me. And I won't snitch on the rest to get a lighter sentence, either. I'll know Appleton, and I know we'll get ours in the spring, but what I want to know is, when I get out, can I come to you for a job?" Bill rose from his chair and thntsst a big hand toward the other. "Stromberg," he said, "you are no more a crook than I am. You threw in with a bad bunch, that's all. Suppose we just forget the Bird's Eye business. You and Fallon are the two best men I've got. We are going to beat Mun Crossan this year, and every man in the crew has got to help do it, and next winter, well, Mr. Appleton will have an eye peeled for a man to take Mun Crossan's job, see?" The two big men shook hands, and as he made his way to the bunkhouse, Stromberg wondered at the peculiar smile on the boss's lips as he said, "There are a hell of a lot of good men wasted because of a bad start. So long." The weeks slipped rapidly by. The weather settled, keen and cold, with the crew keyed to the highest pitch of efficiency. "Beat Buck Mun Crossan" became the slogan of the camp, and with the lengthening days it became apparent that a record cut was being banked on the rollways. It was a wonderful winter for Ethel Manton. The spirit of the big country entered her blood. More and more she loved the woods, and learned to respect and admire the rough loyalty of the big men of the logs. She had come to call most of them by name, as with a smile and a nod, or a wave of the hand, she passed them in the timber on her daily excursions in search of rabbits and ptarmigan. And not a man in the crew but would gladly have fought to the last breath for the boss's girl. And now the feel of spring was in the air. Each day the sun climbed higher and higher, and the wind lost its sting. The surface of the snow softened by day, and high-piled white drifts settled slowly into soggy masses of saturated, grey slush. Bill figured that he had nearly 15 million feet down when he called off his sawyers and ordered the clean-up. The nights remained cold, freezing the surface of the sodden snow into a crust of excellent footing, so that the day's work began at midnight and continued until the crust softened under the rays of the morning sun. The men laughed and sang and talked of the drive, and of the waterfront dives of cities, whose cork-pocked floors spoke the shame of the men of the logs. But most of all they talked of the wedding. For as they sat at the supper table on the day the last tree fell, the boss entered, accompanied by the girl. In a few brief words he told them that he was proud of every man jack of them, that they were the best crew that ever came into the woods, and that they had more than earned the bonus. He told them that he realized he was a greener, and thanked them for their loyalty and cooperation, without which his first season as camp foreman must have been doomed to failure. Cheer after cheer interrupted his words, and when he took Ethel by the hand and announced that they were soon to be married in that very room and invited all hands to the wedding, their cheers drowned his voice completely. But when the girl tried to speak to them, choked in confusion, and with her eyes brimming with tears, extended both hands and gasped, 011, I love you all, the wild storm of applause threatened to tear the roof from the log walls. It was Ethel's idea that they should be married in the woods. Her love for the wild country grew deeper with the passing days. She loved it all, the silent snowbound forest, the virile life of the big camp with its moments of tense excitement, the mighty crash with which tall trees tore through the branches of lesser trees to measure their length on the scarred snow, the thrill of hunting wild things, and the long evenings when the rich tones of the graphophone fell upon her ears amid rough surroundings, like a voice from the past. But most of all she loved the long walks in the forest, in the deep gloom of moonlit nights with the weird, mysterious shadows all about them as the big man at her side told her of his great love while they planned and dreamed of the future, and then returned to the little office where she listened while he read aloud, pausing now and then to light his black pipe and blow clouds of blue smoke toward the low ceiling. He had grown very close to her, and very dear, this big, impetuous boy, who had suddenly become a masterful man, and in whom she found each day some new depth of feeling, some entirely unsuspected and unexplored nook of his character. Her doubts and fears had long since been thnlst aside, and even the existence of the Indian girl had been forgotten. And so it was that when Ethel told Bill one evening she wished their wedding to take place in the camp, amid the scenes of their future hardships and happiness, he acquiesced gladly, and to the laughing outrage of her dignity picked her up in his 2 hands and tossed her high in the air as he would have tossed a baby. And now the time of the wedding was very near. The clean-up was finished, and day by day they awaited the coming of Appleton and Sheridan, and of Father Lapra of the Rice Lake Mission. The men of the crew set about to make the event one long to be remembered in the Northland. Flowers were unobtainable, but a frame in the form of a giant horseshoe was constructed and covered over with pine cones. A raid was made upon the oat bin, and the oats sifted between the scales of the cones and moistened. The structure was placed near the stove in the bunkhouse, and when the tiny, green shoots began to appear, woe to him who procrastinated in the closing of the door or neglected to tend fire when it was his turn. The walls of the grub shack were completely hidden behind pine branches, and festoons of brilliant red banish encircled the room and depended from the chains of the big, swinging lamps. In the bunkhouse the men busied themselves in the polishing of buck horns for the fashioning of a wonderful chair in whose makeup would be found neither nails nor glue, its parts being bound together by means of sinews and untanned buckskin thongs. The bateau was set up and waiting at the head of the rollways. The snow of the forest slumped lower and lower, and innumerable icy rills found their way to the river over the surface of whose darkened, honeycombed ice flowed a shallow, slushy stream. Father Lapp arrived one morning, pink, smiling, and wet to the middle, having blundered onto thin ice in the darkness. The following morning Sheridan and Appleton appeared with mysteriously bulging packs, and weary from their 3 nights' battle with the slippery, ice-crusted Tote Road. Chapter 47. Muncrossan pays a visit. In the filthy office of the camp on the lower Blood River, Buck Muncrossan sat at his desk and glowered over his report sheets. The ill-trimmed lamp smoked luridly, and the light that filtered through its blackened chimney illumined dimly the interior of the little room. The man pored over his papers with bear-like clumsiness, pausing now and then to wet a begrimed thumb and to curse his luck, his crew, his employer, and any and everything that had to do with logs and logging. It had been a bad season for Buck Muncrossan. The spring break-up was at hand, and the best he could figure was a scant 9 million feet, where Appleton had expected the heavy end of a 25 million foot cut. Many of his best men had gone to the new camp to work, as they supposed, under Fallon. The previous winter's bird's eye cut was lost, Creed was gone, Stromberg was gone, and he trusted none of his men sufficiently to continue the game. The boss rose with a growl, and spat copiously in the direction of the stove. Damn Appleton! And damn the crew! 9 million feet! At that, though, I bet I've laid down half again as much as the new camp. Fallon never run a crew, and he had his camp to build to boot. He resumed his seat, and reaching to the top of the desk drew down a quart bottle, from which he drank in long, deep gurgles. He stared a long time at the bottle, drank again, and stooping, began to unlace his boots. "I'll start the clean-up in the morning, and then I'll find time to pay a little visit I being aimin' to pay all winter." Creed said she was somewheres below the foot of the rapids. "It's anyways 10 days to the break-up, and I ain't worryin' a damn if I do happen to foul Fallon's drive." Jax Lacombe had so arranged his trap lines that on his longest circle he should be absent only one night from the lodge where old Wahatanata kept an ever-vigilant eye upon the comings and goings of Jeanie. Since his return after the great blizzard the half-breed had made numerous trips to the camp of Muncrossan, carrying fresh venison, and he did not like the shifting glances the boss bent toward him, nor the leering smile with which he inquired after Jeanie. As the freezing nights hardened the crust upon the surface of the sodden snow, Jax discarded his rackets and, spending his days in the lodge, attended his traps at night by the light of a lantern. Daylight found him one morning headed homeward on a course paralleling the river and nearly opposite Muncrossan's camp. Steadily he plodded onward, and a smile came to his lips as he formulated his plans for the summer, which included the removal of Jeanie from her dangerous proximity to Muncrossan. He would change his hunting ground, move his lodge up the river, and next season he would supply the camp of MSU Bill, whose heart was good, and who would see that no harm came to the girl. He swung onto the marshy arm of a small lake, whose surface was profusely dotted with conical muskrat houses which reared their brown domes above the broken rice straw and cattail stalks. He had nearly reached the center when suddenly he halted, whirled half around, and clutched frantically at the breast of his shirt. It was as though some unseen hand had dealt him a sharp blow, and a dull, scorching pain shot through his chest. He drew away his hand, red and dripping, glanced wildly about, staggered a few steps, and crashed headlong, with a rustling sound, into the thick growth of dry cattail stalks. On the bank of the marsh a thin puff of vapory smoke drifted across the face of a blackened stump and dissolved in the crisp air, and the sharp crack of a high-power rifle of small caliber raised scarcely an echo against the wall of the opposite shore. A man stepped from behind the stump, glanced sharply about him, and grinned as he leisurely pumped another cartridge into the chamber. He bit the corner from a thick plug of tobacco, and gazed out over the marsh, which showed only the light yellow of the dry stalks and the brown domes of the rat houses. "That ain't so bad for 200 yards, plugged him square in the middle, too. God. I'd hate to die," he muttered, and, turning, followed the shore of the lake and struck into the timber in the direction in which the other had been going. An hour later he slipped silently behind the TNLNK of a tree at the edge of a tiny clearing in the center of which stood a single, smoke-blackened teepee. The blue smoke from a small fire in front of the opening floated lazily upward in the still air, and beside the blaze a leathern-faced crone squatted and stirred the contents of a black pot which simmered from a cross-piece supported at the ends by crotched sticks driven into the ground. The old squaw fitted the lid to the pot, hung the long-handled spoon upon a projection of a forked upright, and, picking up a tin pail, disappeared down the well-worn path to the river. With an evil ear the man stepped boldly into the clearing and crossed to the opening of the teepee. Stooping, he suddenly looked within, where Jeanie Lacombe knelt upon one knee as she fastened the thongs of her moccasin. The man grinned as he recognized the silvery hairs of the great white wolf skin which the girl had thrown across her shoulders. "So you swiped the green as wolf hide, did you? I seen it was gone from the end of the bunkhouse." At the sound the girl looked up, and the blood froze in her veins at the sight of the glittering eyes and sneering lips of Nyan Crossan. He spoke again. "You thought I was done with you, did you? Thought I'd forgot you, and the fight the old she-tiger put up that night on Broken Knee? But that was in the dark, or there'd been a different story to tell." The words came in a horrible nasal snarl, and the little eyes glowed lustfully as they drank in the rich curves of the girl who had sprung to her feet, her muscles tense with terror. "Come along, now, and come peaceable. You're my woman now." I'm willing to let bygones be bygones, and I'll treat you right long as you don't TW none of your tricks. You'll learn who's boss, and as long as you stay by me you'll get plenty to eat and white folks' clothes to wear. That's a heap better living like a damned Injun. You'll soon forget all this. His promises terrified the girl even more than the angry snarl, and with a loud cry she tried to spring past him, but his arms closed about her and he laughed a hard, brutal laugh of contempt for her puny struggles. A shadow fell upon them, and the man whirled, dodging quickly as the sharp bit of an axe grazed his shoulder and tore through the wall of the teepee. He released the girl and lunged toward the old squaw, who was reaching for the pot with its scalding contents. Seizing her by the arm, he threw her heavily to the ground, where she lay while the girl fled to the edge of the clearing and paused, for she knew that in the forest she could easily elude the heavy-footed lumber boss. Mun Crossan, too, realized that pursuit would be useless, and in his rage leveled his rifle at the figure upon the ground. "Come back here," he cried. "Come back, or by God I'll plug her like I plugged." He stopped abruptly and glanced along the sights. The girl hesitated, and the voice of Wahatanata fell sharply upon her. "No. No. Do not come. He will not shoot. Even now his finger flutters upon the trigger. He is afraid to shoot." And she glared defiantly into the glittering eyes that squinted above the gun barrel. Slowly the muzzle lowered and the man laughed, a hard, dry laugh. "You're right," he sneered. "Il won't shoot. But if she don't come back you'll wish to God I had shot." He turned to the girl. "Il ain't going to chase you. I'm going to stand pat. When you get ready you see and come to me, up to the camp. Meanwhile I'll put the old hag where the dogs won't bite her, and while you stay away she don't eat, see? She ail nothing but a rack 0 bones now, and a few days'll fix her clock." "Go find Jax," cried the old woman, fumbling at her blanket. The man laughed. "Sure, go find him," he taunted. A skinny hand was withdrawn from the blanket and the claw-like fingers clutched a fragment of broken knife blade. She held it before the man and the shrunken lips mumbled unintelligible words, then, with a swift movement, she flung it from her and it rang upon the ice at the feet of the girl, who stooped swiftly and seized it. "Go!" cried the old woman. "Far up the river to the camp off one good white man." Again Mun Crossan laughed harshly. "You can't work none of our damned charms on me," he sneered. "Gee one up the river. There ain't no one up there but Fallon's camp, and you might better stick with me. Only don't stay too long. This here old leather image can't live without eating, and when you come we'll have heap big potlatch." The wigwam of old Wabishk, the Indian trapper, was pitched in a dense thicket on the shore of the little Muskrat Lake. In the early grey of the morning the old Indian was startled by the sound of a shot. He peered cautiously through the branches and saw a man pitch forward among the rice stalks. 5 minutes later another man carrying a rifle passed within 100 feet of him and disappeared in the timber in the direction of Blood River Rapids. When he was gone Wabishk ran swiftly to the fallen man and conveyed him to the wigwam, where he plugged the bullet hole with fat and bound up the wound. 2 hours later the bushes parted and Jeannie Lacombe burst panting into the wigwam. The girl uttered a wild cry at the sight of her brother lying motionless upon the robe and dropped to her knees at his side. Mun Crossan grunted the Indian, and watched in silent wonder as the girl leaped to her feet and, seizing an empty pack sack, began stuffing it with food. Snatching a light blanket from the floor, she swung the pack to her shoulders and without a word dashed again into the forest. Chapter 48. The Wedding. The events incident to the wedding of Bill Carmody and Ethel Manton are indelibly stamped upon the memory of every person present. The day was warmer than any preceding one, with a lowering, overcast sky. The dark, soggy snow melted rapidly, and the swollen surface stream gnawed and tore at the honeycombed ice of the river. In the cook shack, Daddy Dunnigan superintended the labours of half a dozen flunkies in the preparation of the gargantuan wedding feast which was to follow the ceremony, and each man of the crew worked feverishly in the staging of the great event. The table, which extended the full length of the grub shack, was scrubbed until it shone and was moved to one side to make room for the heavy benches arranged transversely, one behind the other. The wide aisle between the table and the ends of the benches, leading from the door to the improvised altar at the farther end of the room, was carpeted with blankets from the bunkhouse, and suspended from the ceiling immediately in front of the altar swung the massive horseshoe, fresh and green with sprouting grain. During the afternoon a warm drizzle set in and the men completed the preparations amid a muttered cursing of the weather. An ominous booming and cracking now and then reached their ears from the direction of the river where the sullen, pent-up waters threatened momentarily to break their ice bonds, and the men knew that the logs must go out on the flood though the heavens fell. The drizzle continued, the grey daylight wore into darkness, and with the darkness came the return of good cheer. For rollways must be broken out in the light of day, and the air rang with loud laughter and the rhythmic swing of roaring chanties, as the men realized that they were not to be robbed of their gala day with its long night of feasting. The phonograph, with its high-piled box of records, occupied a conspicuous place upon the dais, and upon the long table was displayed an enormous collection of gifts, chief among which was the ingeniously constructed chair with its broad back of flaring moose antlers. At 7:30 the men filed in from the bunkhouse and found places upon the benches where they sat awkwardly, conversing in loud whispers. Father Lapre, book in hand, took his place at the altar, and a few minutes later Bill Carmody entered with Sheridan and strode rapidly up the aisle. At the sight of the boss the crew rose as one man and the room rang with a loud, spontaneous cheer. The little priest held up his hand for silence. At a signal someone started the graphophone, and to the sweet strains of a march the bride appeared, leaning upon the arm of her uncle. Slowly, with bowed head, in the midst of a strained silence, she traversed the length of the long room, the cynosure of all eyes. When almost at the altar she raised her eyes to the man who awaited her there. Her quick, indrawn breath was almost a gasp, and Appleton felt her arm tremble upon his. He stood waiting for her, this man into whose keeping she was giving her life, exactly as she had seen him at the time of their first meeting in the North Country when he stood, big and bearded, in the gathering dusk, framed in the doorway of the little office. In one swift glance she saw that every detail was the same, from the high-laced boots to the embroidered hunting shirt open at the throat, only his eyes were different. There was no pain, now, in the grey eyes that blazed eagerly into her own, only happiness, and the burning passion of love. And then her uncle retired, and she stood alone with the man, facing the priest. She could hear the voice of the little pink priest and of the big man at her side, and as in a dream she found herself repeating the words of the ritual. She knew that a ring was being placed upon her finger, and she was a wife. And that the priest, in solemn voice, with outstretched hands, was extending them his blessing. The voice hesitated, stopped. In the rear of the room the door was thrown violently open and banged loudly against the log wall. There was a confused scuffling of feet and a scraping of heavy benches as the men craned their necks toward the entrance. Involuntarily Ethel turned, and there, gliding swiftly toward her up the blanket-carpeted aisle, was the most picturesquely beautiful woman she had ever seen. Wide-eyed she stared at the newcomer. Her face went deathly white, and the heart within her breast turned to ice, for instinctively she knew, by the wild, intense beauty of the woman, that she stood face to face with the Indian girl, the genie of Bill Carmody's whispered words. Her brain took in the details with incredible rapidity, and the girl was still coming toward her as she noted the dazzling brightness of the great silvery wolf skin that was flung about her shoulders and caught together at her soft throat, the mass of black hair, upon which the mist beads sparkled like a million diamonds, the dark, liquid eyes, and the even, white teeth that glistened between the curving red lips. The girl was at her side now, and with a low cry threw herself upon her knees before the man, and stretched her arms toward him gropingly. "MSU Bill," she cried, and the voice was sweet and soft, the words uttered with imploring intensity. And then in Ethel's ears was the voice of her husband. "Jeannie, Jeannie," he said, "why have you come? Speak, girl, why have you come to me?" At the sound of the name, the thought that at the very altar this woman's name was upon the lips of her husband, the hot blood surged to her face and the tiny fists clenched. She was about to speak, but was forestalled by the half-breed girl who had leaped to her feet and thrown her arms about Bill's neck and was speaking in short, stabbing words. "Come. Come now, with me. Oh, do not wait. Come, even now it may be too late." The low voice quivered with excitement, and the man's hand patted her shoulder soothingly as he endeavored to quiet her. Ethel took a quick step forward, and the hard tone of her voice cut upon the air like the ring of tempered steel. "Who are you?" she cried. "Speak. What is this man to you?" The Indian girl turned and faced her, seeming for the first time aware of her presence. The dark, liquid eyes flashed as she drew herself to her full height. "To me, he is everything. I would die for him. I love him." The tense tones rang through the long room where 150 big men sat silent, hypnotized by the intense drama of scene. With a lithe, swift movement the half-breed girl raised her hands to her bosom and tore at the fastenings of her hunting shirt. There was the sound of popping buttons, the heavily embroidered shirt flew open, and there, gleaming cold and grey in the lamplight, upon the warm ivory of her bared breast lay a naked blade, the broken blade of a sheath knife. She broke the cord that held it suspended about her neck and extended the blade toward the man, uttering but a single word, and as Bill's eyes fell upon the bit of metal his form stiffened and his fists clenched. "I will come, lead on," he answered, for in his mind rang the words of his solemn promise, "No people of the Inn, and nothing that is upon the earth, nor of the earth, shall prevent me, and one day you will know that my words are TME." The half-breed girl had already turned away when the man's eyes sought the eyes of his wife. She was regarding him with a strange, frightened stare. Her face had turned marble white at his words, and she gasped uncertainly for breath. Her pallor alarmed Bill, who stepped toward her with outstretched arms, but she shrank from his touch and her blue eyes fixed him with their cold, frightened stare. "Ethel," he cried. "Darling, my wife. I must go. It is the promise." Unconsciously he repeated the words of the old squaw. Wahatanata, in the last extremity of her need, is calling, and I must go to her. "Oh, can't you see?" he cried suddenly, as the look of horror deepened upon the face of his wife. "Darling, only long enough to give her aid, then I will return. Surely, surely, dear, you hust me. You will believe in me, just this once. When I return to you I will explain all. I can't wait, now, goodbye." He turned to follow the Indian girl, but before he could take a step his wife's arms were about his neck and her words came in great choking sobs. "No. No. No. You are mine. You cannot go. You will not leave me at the altar. Oh, if you loved me, you could not go." Bill's arms were about her, and the words rushed from his lips, "Love you. I love you more than life itself, I live for you. But I promised, my word has passed, I must go. In a day, 2 days, a week you shall know and understand." With a low, moaning cry Ethel tore herself from his embrace and reeled, fainting into the arms of the priest, while her husband, white-lipped, followed swiftly after the Indian girl who had already gained the end of the aisle. But a few moments had elapsed since Jeannie Lacombe had burst into the room. Moments so tense, so laden with terrible portent, that, although every person in the room heard each spoken word, brains failed to grasp their significance, and Appleton, from his bench near the door, as he saw Bill Carmody turn from his fainting wife, for the first time doubted his sincerity. Men were on their feet now, gazing incredulously at the boss, who, looking neither to the left nor to the right, strode rapidly down the aisle. Scarcely knowing what he did, with the one thought uppermost in his mind, to stop the foreman and bring him to his senses, Appleton leaped the intervening benches and, slamming the heavy door, shot the stout bar. With a roar of anger, Bill seized a heavy split-log bench, sending a couple of lumberjacks tumbling among the feet of their fellows, and whirling it high above his head, drove it crashing through the door. The bar snapped like a toothpick, the heavy panel split in half and dropped sidewise, and without a moment's hesitation Bill grasped the half-breed girl about the waist and SVMNG her through the splintered aperture. Turning, he swept the room with a glare of defiance. For a moment men looked into the narrowed eyes, and then, as the eyes of the boss rested for an instant upon the inert form of his wife, they saw the defiant glare melt into a look of compassion and misery such as none had ever seen in human eyes. Then his shoulders stiffened, his jaws squared, and without a word he stepped through off the shattered door and disappeared in the black drizzle. Chapter 49. On the river. That Blood River Jack's fear for the safety of Jeannie was well founded was borne home to Bill Carmody in the story the girl poured into his ears as they pushed on in the direction of Muncrosson's camp. The night was jet black, and Bill marvelled at the endurance of the girl and the unfailing sagacity with which she led the way. The honeycombed river ice sagged toward the middle of the stream, and the water from the melting snow followed this depression, leaving the higher edges comparatively dry and free from snow. The drizzling rain continued as the two stumbled forward, slipping and splashing through deep pools of icy water. Each moment they were in danger of plunging through some hole in the rotting ice, but the girl pushed unhesitatingly onward, and the man followed. Between them and the camp of Muncrosson lay upward of 100 miles of precarious river trail, and with no CMST on the water-soaked snow of the forest they could not take advantage of the short cuts which would have stricken many miles from their journey. It was broad daylight when Bill called a halt, and after many unsuccessful attempts succeeded in kindling a sickly blaze in the shelter of a clay-streaked cut bank. He unslung the pack which he had taken from the shoulders of the girl, and removed some bacon and sodden bannock. As they toasted the bacon and dried the bannock at the smoky fire, the girl hardly removed her gaze from the face of the big, silent man who, during the whole long night, had scarcely spoken a word. Her eyes flashed as they travelled over the mighty breadth of him and noted the great muscular arms, the tight clamped jaw, and the steely glint of the narrowed grey eyes. Her face glowed with the pride of his strength as she recalled the parting scene in the bunkhouse when he had hurled the heavy bench, crashing through the door, and defied the men of the logs. He had done this thing for her, she reflected, for her, and that he might keep his promise to old Wahatanata. She wondered at his silence. Why did he not speak? And why did he sit gazing with tight-pressed lips into the flaring, spitting little fire? Her breath came faster, and she laid a timid hand upon the man's arm. "The woman?" she asked abruptly. Who is this woman with the hair of gold and the eyes of the summer sky?" The slender fingers gripped his arm convulsively. "She is the woman of the picture," she cried, and her eyes sought his. Bill Carmody nodded slowly and continued to stare into the fire. "She is my wife," he groaned. "Your wife?" The girl repeated the words dully, as if seeking to grasp their import. Her fingers relaxed, her eyes closed, and she lay heavily back upon the blanket. A long time she remained thus while Bill stared stolidly into the fire. At length he aroused himself and glanced toward Jeannie, who lay at his side, breathing the long, regular breaths of the deep sleep of utter weariness, and he noted the deep lines of the beautiful face and the hollow circles beneath the closed eyes that told of the terrible trail strain. 60 straight hours of that, he exclaimed as his glance travelled over the precarious river trail. Curbing his patience, he waited an hour and then gently awoke the sleeping girl. "Jeannie," he said as she gazed at him in bewilderment, "you need sleep. I will go alone to the camp of Muncrosson." At the words she sprang to her feet. "No. No," she cried, "I have slept. I am not tired. Come, today, and tonight, and in the morning we come to the camp." "We must go then," said Bill, and added more to himself than to Jeannie, "I wonder if he would dare." He would dare anything. That is not good, the girl answered quickly. He has the bad heart. But Wahatanata will not starve quickly. She is old and tough, and can go for many days without food, as in the time of the famine when she refused to eat that we, her children, might live. Even in times of plenty she eats but little, for she lives in the long ago with Lacombe, in the days of her youth and happiness. For she loved Lacombe, the girl's voice broke throatily, and she turned abruptly toward the river. The fine, drizzling rain, which had fallen steadily all through the night, changed to a steady downpour that chilled them to the bone. The stream of shallow water that flowed over the surface of the ice swelled to a torrent, forcing them again and again to abandon the river and slosh knee-deep through the saturated snow of the forest. Broken ice cakes began to drift past, thick, black cakes which scraped and ground together as they swung heavily in the current. "The ice is going out," cried the girl in dismay. "We can no longer keep to the river." Bill's teeth clenched. "The break up," he groaned. "Mun Crossan will go out on the flood, and Wahatanata," he redoubled his efforts, fairly dragging the girl through the deep slush. The rain was caning off the snow with her msh. The gullies and ravines were running bankful, and time and again the two were forced to plunge shoulder-deep into the icy waters. At noon they halted, and in the dripping shelter of a dense thicket wolfed down a quantity of sodden bannock and raw bacon. The river rose hourly, and the crash and grind of the moving ice thundered continuously upon their ears. Progress was slow and kneeling. By the middle of the afternoon they had covered about 40 miles. The water from the rising river began to set back into the ravines, forcing them to make long day tours before daring to chance a ford. Darkness came as an added hardship, and as they toiled doggedly around an abrupt bend they saw on a tiny plateau, high above the dark waters of the river, a faint flicker of light. The girl paused and regarded it curiously, then, hurrying to the point, she peered up and down the river, striving for landmarks in the gathering gloom. "Vicchino's cabin," she cried. "Missed it coming up. I knew it was somewhere up the river. He's a friend of Jack's, and his father was the good friend of Lacombe." Drenched and weary, the two pushed toward the light, crossing swift rushing gullies whose icy waters threatened each moment to sweep them from their feet. Slipping and stumbling through the muck and slush, crashing through dripping underbrush, they stood at length before the door of the low-roofed log cabin. Their knock was answered by a tousled-headed man who stood, lamp in hand, and blinked owlishly at them from the shelter of the doorway. "You are Vicchino?" asked the girl, and, without waiting for his grunted assent, continued, "I am Jeannie Lacombe, and this is Msu Bill, the man who cannot die." At the mention of the names the door swung wide and the man smiled a welcome. They entered amid a rabble of sled dogs and puppies, which rolled about the floor in a seemingly inextricable tangle, with numerous dusky youngsters of various ages and conditions of nudity. Chino's Indian wife sat upon the edge of the bunk, a blackened cob pipe between her teeth, industriously beating a moccasin, and seemed in no wise disturbed by the arrival of visitors, nor by the babel of hubbub that arose from the floor, where dogs and babies howled their protest against the cold draught from the open door and the pools of ice-cold water that drained from the clothing of the strangers. Chino pronounced a few guttural syllables, and the stolid squaw reached behind her and, removing a single garment of flaming red calico from a nail, extended it toward Jeannie. The girl accepted it with thanks, and her eyes roved about the cabin, which, being a one-roomed affair, offered scant privacy. The woman caught the corner of a blanket upon a projecting nail and another corner upon a similar nail in the upright of the bunk, and motioned the girl behind the screen with a short wave of her pipe. The man offered Bill a pair of faded blue overalls and a much bepatched shirt of blue flannel, and when Jeannie emerged, clad in the best dress of her hostess, Bill took his turn in the dressing room. "Can't be too particular in a pinch," he grinned as he wriggled dubiously into the dry garments, and in a few minutes he was seated beside the girl upon a rough bench drawn close to the fire. Chino, being a half-breed, was more inclined toward garrulity than his Indian spouse. "How you come?" he asked with evident interest. Jeannie answered him, speaking rapidly, and at the end of a half-hour the man was in full possession of the details of their plight. He slowly shook his head. "Mun crossin' camp for far 50, see 80 mile," he said. "You know male?" Bill looked up suddenly. "Have you a canoe?" he inquired. The other looked at him in surprise. "Canoe, she no good," he grunted. "Too much ice. British English K all to hell in 1 minute." With an exclamation he leaped to his feet. "By gar! De flat boat," he cried triumphantly. "She's all built for tack de fur. De riv, she nm the swift. In de morning you go, in de evening you come on de camp." "Il will pay you well for the boat," said Bill eagerly. "I have no money here. Give me a pencil, I will write an order on Monsieur Appleton, the man who owns the woods." At the words the half-breed shmggedu no got for Marquis right, he said. "You tell Wahatanata you come, by gar. You come. You tell me you pay, you pay. You no got for Mac right." Bill smiled. "That is all right, providing I get through. What if the boat gets tipped over or smashed in the ice?" Chino shrugged again. "You de man who cannot die," he said. "You got a good heart. In de woods all peoples know. You know Mac right. I got no pencil." Chapter 50. Face to Face. Before daylight next morning the two men dragged the little flat boat to the water's edge. The river had risen to full flood during the night, and out of the darkness came the crash and grind of ice, the dull roar and splash of undermined banks, and the purling rumble of swift-moving water. After breakfast Bill and Jeannie, armed with light spruce poles, took their places. Chino pushed the boat into the current and it shot downstream, whirling in the grip of the flood. There was no need for oars. Both Bill and the girl had their work cut out warding off from drifting ice cakes and the thrashing branches of uprooted trees. Time and again they came within a hair's breadth of destruction. The eddying, seething surface of the swift-mashing river seemed to hurl its debris toward their little craft in fiendish malevolence. Ice cakes crashed together on every hand, waterlogged tree butts snagged them bow and stem, and the low-hanging limbs of sweepers clawed and tore at them like the teeth of a giant rake as they swept beneath, lying flat upon the bottom of the boat. Bill grinned at the thought of a canoe. In the suck and swirl of the current the odds were heavily against even the stout flat boats winning through. He estimated their speed to be about 8 miles an hour and devoted his whole attention to preventing the boat from fouling the drift. They were riding the run out and he knew that Mun Crossan would wait for the river to become comparatively free of drift before breaking out his rollways. The rain ceased, but the sky remained heavily overcast and darkness overtook them while yet some distance above the log camp and skirting the opposite shore. Eager as he was to meet Mun Crossan, Bill decided not to risk crossing the river in the fast-gathering darkness. Gradually the boat was worked toward shore and poled into the backwater of submerged Beaver Meadow. Landing upon a slope a couple of 100 yards back from the river, they tilted the boat on edge, and, inclining it forward, rested it upon the tops of stakes thrust into the ground. The blanket was spread, and with the roaring fire directly in front the uptilted boat made an excellent shelter. An awkward constraint, broken only by necessary monosyllables, had settled upon the two. On the river each had been too busy with the working hand to give the other more than a passing thought, but now, in the intimacy of the campfire, each felt uneasily self-conscious. Supper over, Bill lighted his pipe and stared moodily into the flames with set face and brooding eye. From her position at his side Jeannie covertly watched the silent man. Of what was he thinking? Surely not of the girl, his wife. She winced at the word, but the tense, almost fierce expression of his face, the occasional spasmodic clenching of the great fists, could scarcely accompany a man's thoughts of his wife of an hour. Of Mun Crossan? She wondered. Of the shooting of Jax? Of the attack upon her? Of Wahatanata? But, no, The grey eyes were staring into the fire calmly, and in their depths she could see no gleam of hate nor steely glitter of rage. What was it he said the day she told him of the affair on Broken Knee? Too, could kill him for that. The girl gave it up, and fell to wondering what the morrow would bring forth. At daylight, when they poled the boat into the river, Bill gazed in surprise at the surface of the stream. A few belated ice cakes floated lazily in the current, and many uprooted snags reared their scraggly heads as they rolled sluggishly in the water. But what riveted his attention were the logs. Hundreds and hundreds of smoothly floating logs dotted the river, and as far as the eye could reach more logs were come. He leaped to his feet and stood, shading his eyes with his hand. Far up the stream the surface seemed solid with logs, and here and there he could make out moving figures. Tiny and frail they looked, like strange, misshapen insects, as they leaped from log to rolling log, the white water men of the north. "It's the drive," he cried excitedly. 11. Drive. "Come, pole for your life, we've got to work her across." A mile farther down they swept around a wide bend, and before them loomed the cleared rollways of Munkrossen's camp, and on top of the slope, for all the world like fortifications commanding the river, were pile after pile of pyramided logs. The little flat boat was rapidly approaching, and men could be seen swarming about the rollways. One man with a shin of flaming red rushed among them, gesticulating wildly, and faintly to their ears came the raucous bellowing of his voice. At the sight of him Jeannie paled visibly. The man was Munkrossen. Even as they looked the first rollway tore loose, the logs, rolling and tumbling down the steep slope, leaped into the river with a roar and a splash that sent a fountain of white spray flying skyward. Bill set his pole and fairly hurled the boat into the bank well above the rollways. "Good God," he cried. "Can't he see the drive? They'll jam and my men will be killed." He leaped ashore and crashed through the intervening underbrush in great bounds, closely followed by the light-footed Jeannie. They gained the top, and while rushing along the rollways could hear Munkrossen roaring his orders, could catch the words that foamed from his lips amid volleys of crashing oaths. "Cut them toggles! Let him go! Let him go! Damn you! Foul that drive! I'll show 'em if they see and slip a drive through me!" And then face to face between two high-piled pyramids, they met. The words died in a horrible, throaty gurgle, and Munkrossen's face, livid with rage, turned chalky as his eyes roved vacantly from Bill Carmody's face to the face of the girl beyond. His jaw wagged weakly, his flabby lips sagged open, exposing the jagged, brown teeth, and he passed his hand uncertainly across his eyes. "It's the greener," he mumbled thickly. "It's the greener hisself." Another rollway led into the river, and Bill leaped into the open. "Stop," he cried. "It's murder. There are men on that drive." The two lumberjacks who stood almost at his side turned at the sound of his voice. For one moment they stared into his face, and then with a wild yell dropped their peavies and fled toward the bunkhouse. Other men looked, and from lip to lip flashed the word, "the greener." Men stared at him dumbly, or turned and dashed for the clearing in a panic of fear. "He come up out of the river," shrilled one as he ran. "Ill seen him. And I seen him go under a year back. He come hell a rippin' up through the bushes, and a she one a follerin'." Men crowded about, the bolder spirits, the matter-of-fact, and the unsuperstitious among the crew, and Bill turned again to Munkrossen, who stood rooted in his tracks. "Where is she?" he asked in a low voice that cut distinctly upon the silence. "The mother of this girl." Munkrossen started. With a visible effort he strove for control of himself. "Who are you?" he blurted, and the words rasped hollow and dry. Bill turned to the men. "Do you know?" he asked. "An old Indian woman, did he bring her to this camp?" The men stared blankly from the speaker to Munkrossen and into each other's faces. Suddenly, one stepped forward. "Look in the storeroom," he cried. A little while back, it was at night, I seen em drag something in, him and Larson of the van. At the words, Mun Crossan sprang toward the speaker with an inarticulate growl of rage. You lie, he screamed, but before he reached the man, who shrank back into the crowd, Bill stepped in front of him. He raised his arm and pointed toward the clearing. Ito the storehouse, he said in the same low voice. For a fleeting second Mun Crossan glared into his eyes, and without a word, turned and led the way, closely followed by Bill and Jeannie, while the crowd of wondering lumberjacks brought up the rear. At the storehouse Mun Crossan paused. I'll fetch the key from the office, he leered, but Bill turned to a man who stood leaning upon his axe. Smash that door, he commanded, and a half-dozen men sprang to the task. The next instant the door flew inward, and the men crowded into the building to return a few moments later bearing the old squaw, gagged, bound, and wrapped tightly in a blanket, but with the undimmed black eyes glaring upon them like a hawk's. The cords were cut and the gag removed by willing hands. Someone held a bottle to her lips, and she drank greedily. Jeannie dropped to her knees by the old woman's side. He has come, she whispered. MSU Bill, the man who cannot die, has come to you. Wahatanata nodded her understanding, and her beady black eyes flashed. She must have water, cried the girl, and food. At the words a half-dozen men rushed toward the cook shack, returning a few minutes later laden as to victual a regiment. Chapter 51. The promise fulfilled. Again the interest centered upon the two big men who faced each other on the trodden ground of the clearing. Other men came, the ones who had fled from the rollway, their curiosity conquering their fear at the sight of the dead, and now the greener was speaking, and the tone of his voice was gentle in its velvety softness. His lips smiled, and his grey eyes, narrowed to slits, shone cold, with a terrible, steely coldness, so that men looked once, and shuddered as they looked. And, now, Mun Crossan, he was saying, we will fight. It is a long score that you and I have to settle. It starts with your dirty schemes that Stromberg wouldn't touch. Then, the well-laid plan to have Creed bump me off that night at Melton's No. 9, and the incident of the river, when you broke the jam. You thought you had me, then, Mun Crossan. You thought I was done for good and all, when I disappeared under the water. There are other things, too, little acts of yours, that we will figure in as we go. The affair on Broken Knee, when you attacked this young girl, the shooting of Blood River Jack, from ambush, the second attack on the girl at the foot of the rapid, and the brutal starving of Wahatanata. Oh, yes, and the little matter of the bird's eye. I have the logs, Mun Crossan, all safely cached. The pile of ashes you found was a blind. Quite a long score, take it first and last, isn't it, Mun Crossan? The silence, save for the sound of the voice, was almost painful. Men strained to listen, looking from one to the other of the two big men, with white, tense faces. At the words, the blood rushed to the boss's face. His little, swinish eyes fairly blazed in their sockets. He was speechless with fury. The cords knotted in his neck, and a great blue vein stood out upon his forehead. The breath hissed through his clenched teeth as the goading words fell in the voice of purring softness. But it has come to a showdown at last, between you and me, the greener went on as he slowly and methodically turned the sleeves of his shirt back from his mighty forearms. They tell me you are a fighting man, Mun Crossan. They tell me you have licked men, here in the woods, good men, too. And they tell me you have knocked down drunken men, and stamped on their faces with your steel-corked boots. Maybe, if you last well, I will save a couple of punches for those poor devils' account. I think you will last, Mun Crossan. You are big, and strong, and you are mad enough, in your blind, bull-headed way. But I am not going to knock you out. I am going to make you lie down, to make you show your yellow, and quit cold, for this is going to be your last fight. When I am through, Mun Crossan, you won't be worth licking. No 10-year-old boy will think it worth his while to step out of his way to slap your dirty face." With a hoarse bellow, Mun Crossan launched himself at the speaker. And just at that moment, swarming over the bank at the rollways, came the men of the upper drive. The leaders paused, and sizing up the situation, came on at a NM. "A fight," they yelled. "A fight. HOLRAY." Then came Appleton and Sheridan with their wives, and beside them walked a slender, girlish figure, whose shoulders drooped wearily, and whose face was concealed by a heavy, dark blue veil. The two lumbermen guided the ladies hurriedly in the direction of the office, when suddenly the shrill voice of Charlie Manton broke upon their whoopee. "It's Bill. Go to it, Bill. Swing on him. Give him your left, Bill. Give him your left." They halted, and obeying some strange impulse, the girlish figure turned and made straight for the wildly yelling men, who stood in the form of a great circle in the center of which two men weaved and milled about each other in a blur of motion. Old Daddy Dunnigan was the first to see her hovering uncertainly upon the edge of the crowd. Brandishing his CNLTCH, he howled into the ears of those nearest him, "Give thy lady a chance. Come on, miss. He's her man, and God be praised. She wants to see fight." The men made a lane, and scarcely knowing what she did, Ethel found herself standing beside the old Irishman, who had wormed his way to the very front rank of the crowding circle. She stared in fascinated terror, throwing back her veil for a clearer view, regardless of the men who stared at her in surprise and wondered at the whiteness of her face. Bill Carmody met Mun Crossan's first rush with a quick, short jab that reached the corner of his eye. With an almost imperceptible movement he leaned to one side, and the flail-like swing of the huge boss's arm passed harmlessly within an inch off his ear. Mun Crossan lost no time. Pivoting, he swung a terrific body blow which glanced lightly against Bill's lowered shoulder, and the greener came back with two stiff raps to the ear. Again and again Mun Crossan rushed his antagonist, lashing out with both fists, but always the blows failed by a barely perceptible margin, and Bill, always smiling, and without appreciable effort, stung him with short, swift punches to the face. And always he talked. Low and smooth his voice sounded between the thud of blows and the heavy breathing of the big boss. "Poor business, Mun Crossan, poor judgment, for a fighting man. Save your wind, take it easy, and you'll last longer. This is a long fight, Mun Crossan, take it slow and steady." The taunting voice was always in the boss's ears, goading him to blind fury. He paused for breath, with guard uplifted, and in that moment Bill Carmody saw for the first time the figure of his wife. For an instant their eyes met, and then Mun Crossan was at him again. But Bill's low, taunting voice did not waver. "That's better," he said, and moved his head to one side as a vicious blow passed close. "And now, Mun Crossan, I'm going to hit you on the nose. I haven't hit you yet, those others were just to feel you out." With an incredibly swift movement he swung clear from the shoulder. There was the wicked, smashing sound of living flesh hard struck. The big boss staggered backward, pawing the air, and the red blood spurted from his flattened nose. "That one is for trying to get Stromberg to file a link." Bill ducked a lunging blow without raising his guard. "And now your ear, Mun Crossan, I won't knock it off, but it will never be pretty again." Another long swing landed with a glancing twist that split the ear in half. "That is for the creed item, and this one is for the river." The boss's head snapped backward to the impact of a smashing blow. Again he staggered, and, turning, spat a mouthful of blood which seeped into the ground, leaving upon the surface several brownish, misshapen nuggets. "God," breathed a man, and turned away. "It's his teeth." The yelling had ceased and men stared white-faced. This was not the fighting they were used to. They understood only the quick, frenzied fighting of fury, where men pummel each other in blind rage, fighting close as tigers fight, gugging and biting one another as they roll upon the ground, locked in each other's grip. The men gazed in awe, with a strange, unspoken terror creeping into their hearts, upon the vicious battering blows, the coldly gleaming eyes and smiling lips of the man who fought, not in any fume of passion, but deliberately, smoothly, placing his terrific blows at will with a cold, deadly accuracy that smashed and tore. Mun crossin' NLSHED again. And now for the other things, Bill continued, the attacks upon the defenseless girl, the attempted murder from ambush, and the starving of an old woman. Blow followed blow, until in the crowd men cried out sharply, and those who had watched 100 fights turned away white-lipped. Mun Crossan fought blindly now. His eyes were closed and his face one solid mass of blood. And still the blows fell. Smash! 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 It was horrible, those deliberate, tearing blows, and the lips that smiled in cold, savage cruelty. No blow landed on the point of the jaw, on the neck, on the heart, or the pit of the stomach, blows that bring the quiet of oblivion, but each landed with a cutting twist that ground into the flesh. At last, with his face beaten to a crimson pulp, Mun Crossan sagged to his knees, tried to rise, and crashed limp and lifeless to the ground. And over him stood Bill Carmody, smiling down at the broken and battered wreck of the bad man of the logs. Gradually the circle that surrounded the fighters broke into little groups of white-faced, silent men who shot nervous, inquiring glances into each other's faces and swore softly under their breath, the foolish, meaningless oaths of excitement. Minutes passed as Ethel stood gazing in terrible fascination from the big man to the thing on the ground at his feet. And as she looked, a hideous old squaw, apparently too weak to stand, strggled from her place of vantage among the feet-off men, and crawled to the limp, sprawled form. Leaning close she peered into the shapeless features, crooning and gurgling, and emitting short, sham whines of delight. Her beady eyes glittered wickedly, like the eyes of a snake, and the withered lips curled into a horrid grin, exposing the purple snag-toothed gums. Suddenly the bent form knelt upright, the skeleton arms raised high above the tangle of grey-black hair, the thin, high-pitched voice quavered the word 0fa weird chant, the claw-like fingers twitched in short, jerky spasms, and the emaciated body swayed and weaved to the wild, barbaric rhythm of the chanted curse. Terrible, blighting, the words were borne to the ears of the girl. Bearded men looked, listened, and turned away, shuddering. The sun burst suddenly through a rift in the flying clouds, and his golden radiance fell incongruously upon the scene. Ethel gazed as at some horrid phantasm, the rough men with gaudy shirts of red and blue and multicolored checks, standing in groups with tense, set faces, the other man, her man, standing alone, silent and smiling, by the side of his blood-bathed victim, and the old crone, whose marked form writhed in the swing of the thin shrieked chant. And then before she sensed that he had moved he stood before her. She raised her eyes to his in which the hard, cold gleam had given place to a look of intense longing, of infinite love, and the long-pent yearning of a soul. He stretched his arms toward her and she saw that the bruised and swollen hands were stained with blood. Suddenly she realized that this man was her husband. A sickening fear overcame her, and she shrank, shuddering, from the touch of the blood-smeared hands. A look of terror came into her face, she covered her eyes with her hands as if to shut out the horror of it all, and, turning, fled blindly, she knew not where. As she ran there still sounded in her ears the words of the high, thin chant, the blighting curse of Yuga. Chapter 52. The Big Man. Darkness settled over the North Country. The sky had cleared, the wind gone down, and the air was soft and balmy with the feel of spring. A million stars sparkled overhead and above the intense blackness of the pines the moon rose, flooding the timberland with the mystery of her soft radiance. Ethel tossed uneasily in her cot and glanced across to where her aunt and Mrs. Sheridan slumbered heavily. Then she arose and stood at the window gazing out on the moonlit clearing with its low, silent buildings, and clean-cut, black shadows. Noiselessly she dressed and stole into the silvery world. Utterly wretched, dispirited, heartsick, she wandered aimlessly, neither knowing nor caring whither her slow, dragging steps carried her. Somewhere in the distance, sounding faint and far, came the shouts of men. Unconsciously she wandered toward the river. On the edge of a high bluff overlooking the rollways and the rushing waters she paused, leaning wearily against the bole of a giant birch. Thanks to the quick action of Bill Carmody, Muncrosson's scheme of fouling the upper drive had taken no toll off human life. The few rollways that were broken out, however, were sufficient to cause a nasty jam, and far below where the girl stood the men of both crews worked furiously among the high-piled logs. Weird and unreal it seemed to Ethel as she gazed down upon the flare of huge fires built upon the bank, the tiny flash of lanterns and the flicker of torches, where the men swarmed out upon the uncertain footing. Rough calls of rough men sounded above the crash and pound of logs and the roar of the rushing waters. Now and then a scrap of rude chanty reached her ears, a hoarse oath, or a loud, clear order in a voice she knew so well. It was like some ET fantasy, born of an overwrought brain. And yet she knew it was real, intensely real. Down there among the flashing lights men played with death, big, rough men who laughed loud as they played, and swore mighty oaths, and sang wild, full-throated songs. From the shadow almost at her side came the sound of a half-stifled sob. She started. There was a soft footfall on the leaf mould, and before her stood Jeannie Lacombe. The soft moonlight touched with silvery sheen the long hairs off great, white wolf skin which the girl wore thrown loosely across her shoulders. As Ethel gazed upon the wild, dark beauty of the Indian girl, her tiny fists clenched, and her breath came in short, quick gasps. Why was she here? Had she followed to taunt her to her face? A mighty rage welled up within her, her shoulders stiffened, and as she faced the girl her blue eyes flashed. And then the Indian girl spoke, and at the first words of the soft, rich voice, the rage died in her heart. She looked closely, and in the dark, liquid eyes was a look the white girl will never forget. She listened, and with few words and all the dramatic eloquence of the pure Indian the half-breed girl told of the rescue from the river, of her own love for Msu Bill, the man who cannot die, of his firm rejection of that love, of her pursuit of him when he started for the land of the white man, of the scene at the campfire when old Wahatanata called him the one good white man, of the broken knife, of the promise, of her peril at the hand of Muncrosson, and of the cold-blooded shooting of her brother. And then she told of Bill's all-absorbing love for her, Ethel. And of how he always loved her, even when he believed she hated and despised him, of his deep hurt and the misery of his soul when he believed that she was to marry another. Until suddenly there in the moonlight the girl of the city saw for the first time the bigness of the man, her man. She saw him as he was now and as he had been in the making, the man who had been dubbed Broadway Bill, the spawn the souse who had soaked a cop and then beat it in a taxi. And then the man who, without name or explanation, had won the regard of such a keen judge of men as Appleton, and who, under the stigma of theft, held that regard without question, the man who beat the booze game after he had lost his heart's desire, and had been sneered at as a coward and a quitter, the man who, having gained his heart's desire, in the very bigness of him, had unhesitatingly risked wrecking his whole life's happiness to keep his promise to an old, toothless, savage crone, and who, in brute fashion, bare-fisted, had all but pounded the life from the body of the hulking Muncrosson in defence of a woman's honour. And this was the man who, 18 short months before, had turkey-trotted upon the sidewalk in front of a gay resort, and had pulled it too raw even for Broadway. The floodgates of her soul opened, as is the way of women in all the world. The great sobs came, and with them tears, and in the tree-filtered moonlight the two girls, the tutored white girl and the half-savage Indian, women both, wept in each other's arms. Up the trail from the river, almost at their feet, wearily climbed a man, dog-tired from physical exertion, and worn out with responsibility and heart-rack he toiled slowly up the steep ascent. At the top he paused and removed his cap to let the cool air blow against his throbbing temples. At the sight of the two forms he drew back, but at the same moment they saw him. With one last, long look, and no word of farewell save a dry, choking sob, the Indian girl glided silently into the darkness of the forest, which was her home, and the home of her people. On the edge of the bluff the other stood silhouetted against the star-flecked sky. She, too, gazed at the man who stood motionless in the moonlight. Then with a lithe, quick movement she opened her arms to him, her lips parted, and in the blue eyes blazed the love of all the ages. As her body poised to meet his, the man sprang toward her. His arms closed about her, their lips met, and for a long, long time they looked deep into each other's eyes. Then slowly the tiny fingers closed about his, the girl raised them reverently to her lips and covered with kisses the great, brutalized, and swollen the end.